interested in some of your opinions since it sounds to be like you've actually raided in Dragonflight, and I have done very little. So that's insight that I think would be awesome to have.
Okay, that's one of the things on my notes.
So, greetings once again, my friends, and welcome back to another GNRO minicast, for lack of a better term here. It's going to be a full-on GNRO podcast. My name is Adam Mickelson. I am your host, aka known as Drak. I hope everybody's having an awesome day or night when you're listening to this, but this is kind of an unusual one because it's going to be more of a geek news, open discussion kind of panel. And joining me tonight is my buddy Rising Sun. Rising Sun, it's been a long time, my friend. How are you?
I'm good, other than the fact that you kidnapped me and forced me to do this with you.
Now, just remember what you say, otherwise Light Sean gets it.
Oh, I mean, she already doesn't work right. So.
Well, I mean, she wrecked, half of your apartment? So...
Exactly. But the question for you, though, Drak, is do you have a Christmas tree sawn up?
A Christmas tree sawn? Unfortunately, yes. No, because my wife broke my Christmas tree, damn it!
Wait, how'd you do that?
Well, it's one of those little pre-lit ones, and I used it like every year, and I don't know what happened, but we plugged it in last year so that we could put it on the stream, and it wouldn't light up. And instead, I saw a little spark going through the plug, and then we smelled a faint burning, and then we immediately unplugged it.
Good call.
Yeah.
Well, I see we both have electrical issues with our appliances and lights.
Yes. I guess that's just kind of par for the course, especially when you're trying to record a podcast and whatnot. No, we're gonna fix that. But anyway, so why are we here? Why are we discussing some things? Well, if people might remember in a previous podcast that we did also with Brenton Volley, we discussed MMOs, specifically World of Warcraft, because at that point, we had just barely gotten the announcement for Dragonflight, the recent expansion that is out right now. And we were still kind of mulling over the many failings of the previous expansion, Shadowlands, or as I like to call it, the Warcraft 3 Reforged expansion, because either that or the Too Much Busy Work expansion. And so at that point, we had that transition, but now we are, I'm trying to think of when Dragonflight came out. Was it last year?
Yeah, it was last November.
Yeah,
it was like right around Thanksgiving. I think a little bit before Thanksgiving, because like I was really sick the week it came out, which was both good because I wasn't working because I was sick, but also bad because I did not feel like being off the couch.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and I was too busy to try and play anything. But yeah, almost a year since Dragonflight came out. And so we have quite a bit to be able to talk about here, especially with overall how Dragonflight is done. But one of the reasons that we're doing this is literally next week, is BlizzCon. And that's where we're expecting, because of the recently released schedule, we are probably going to get the next expansion for World of Warcraft post Dragonflight. And so we'll probably meet up again, because at that point we will also have 10.2 out. And so we will be able to speak on that and whether or not we like some of the features. The only thing we might not be able to talk about is the raiding, and you're kind of the active raider right now. So it'll be interesting to see you. Like, we might have to bring you in again later just to get your feelings on Amir Drasil and how that turned out as a raid. But let's start at the beginning here. So just to bring people up to speed, what were your thoughts on WoW in Shadowlands moving into that Dragonflight announcement? Where were you standing with the game?
Yeah, so I think we talked about that like last time I was on, like a long time ago.
Yes,
like
that's why we're going to do a little bit of a refresher here.
Yeah, so I was not a big fan of Shadowlands. I think there's some like interesting concepts introduced early on, but the story just felt really lame, and like the ending felt rushed, and some of the stuff with the various characters it did not live up to the potential I feel it should have. Mm-hmm. Gameplay wise, like content I think was kind of okay. I did not really care for the raids, and like the raiding is one of the main things I do, so that just I was glad to be done with the raid. I like took a break during season 4 then, just like I need to step away from this for a while.
Refresh my memory. Were you also doing the Mythic Plus scene along with raiding?
Occasionally, it was more so like as a way to like gear up my character for raids.
All right. Yeah, I just
So
couldn't
like,
remember because like I'm more of a Mythic Plus guy now, whereas I used to do raiding. I think the last expansion I legitimately raided on a raid team was Legion, and that was like Emerald Nightmare.
yeah,
So I never hit
I,
Nightwell or anything like that, but I at least have the raiding experience from previous raids to be able to go off of.
yeah, I think it's interesting. There's like, I feel like you're not the only one. Like a lot of the focus feels like it has shifted to Mythic Plus.
Yeah,
Like if you look at it in the comments, like on Reddit or WoW had, like that's a lot of what people are concerned about. Well, for me, it's like, well, yes, that's a part of it, but
right.
like if people are complaining about Mythic Plus, I don't really care.
Well, and the other thing too is since Mythic Plus's it what's the word I'm looking at? Admission in from Legion, the fact that it's actually become kind of an essential mechanic for a lot of raid teams to basically gear there and not like because at that point LFR isn't even out yet, so we can't even get like the raid weapons, the raid trinkets, which are probably going to be like the best in slot for that particular patch. And so you have to rely on what you can get, which in this case, for a lot of the hardcore rating teams, is going to be we're going to go ahead and grab um, we're going to go ahead and grab as much Mythic Plus gear as we possibly can because at least it's going to be something that we can go into normal or starting heroic of Vault of the Incarnates in this case.
Yeah, and I think like yeah, because LFR is like a week behind the raid,
Yep.
so you get to raid lockouts, but Mythic Plus is basically an infinitely grindable source of
Well, and
gear.
even then, you only
Not
get the first wing. So at that point, you don't even get everything unlocked.
so yeah, you're not going to be doing LFR unless you for gear unless it's like you're really unlucky in a certain slot and
Right.
you want something. So you'll probably just like grind Mythic Plus as much as you can, get at least something in all the slots, and like fill it in more with like the weekly chest and the raid as you go.
Right. So at that point, so you were obviously frustrated here because the raids weren't really living up to the hype that you've been used to. I mean, you've been raiding since Cataclysm, so at that point,
Yeah.
you've seen some pretty
So,
epic raids at this point.
yeah, so like Castle Nathria, that was a solid raid. Like that was a great
That's what
introduction
I've
to
heard.
Shadowlands. Sanctum of Domination, like it had a few okay fights, but as a whole, I didn't like it. And then I forget what the last one was even called.
Um, Vault of the Makers or something like that. It was in Zareth Mortis. I remember that.
Yeah, I remember what the raid was. I feel like that's also not
It's not,
Crucible or something.
but I can look it up really quick. But go on while I look that up.
Yeah, and that one, just like looking back, a couple of fights again were kind of neat, but like I feel nothing for that raid.
Yeah, not a whole lot of people do, especially when a lot of the story reveals started coming out for that raid. It's not loved by any stretch, especially for those who in particular did not like the direction that Arthas's character went because of the reveal after the Anduin fight.
Yeah, like
It,
I don't completely remember that reveal though. I do remember the Anduin fight. That I think I thought was a good one. It would have been better if it had like better story to support it.
right. No,
But yeah,
the
like other
whole
than
expansion feels like it could have had a lot better story to improve it.
yeah, but like other than the thing with Anduin, I can't really tell you what the story is other than we went in there, we fought the jailer. Somehow there's a tie to Azeroth I don't understand, and then we won.
Right. Well, because they basically wanted to try and make so. First of all, the raid was called Sepulchre of the First Ones. Um,
Okay, I was completely off, so that's good.
yeah, I remember that it had something like the makers of the first ones, but I couldn't remember what it was. The problem was ultimately the story of Shadowlands itself was just very uh wrecked in the concept that they tried to make it like um for those who don't know like the actual name of him, I'll go by the jailer because that's how we knew him. But they basically tried to shoehorn in that the jailer has been there and has been part of the lore since way back in Warcraft 3. And so then like he's been basically manipulating everything the second the scourge came on to Azeroth. Like they I wouldn't be surprised if they actually manipulated it and said, I'm the guy who planted the idea in Killjaden's head to make the Lich King in the first place. And they basically tried to shoehorn that in, and the audience just didn't accept it.
Like he was meant to be like the mastermind behind everything.
Yes, exactly. Well, he
Which
wasn't the mastermind behind the Legion, but he was the mastermind behind a lot of events, including the Scourge.
Yeah, I guess mastermind behind a lot of things
Yes.
is like they have their whole like cosmology chart, like with death being one of the primary six forces.
Yes.
So they like really wanted to fill that out, make him the villain of like the death plane or
Yes.
force,
Well, and basically
which
making him out to be like, oh, he is the true Lich King. Arthas, like all you silly people who followed Arthas's story and thought he was the Lich King, yeah, bullshit. No, this guy's the true Lich King.
yeah, he's the one behind the Lich King.
Mm-hmm.
Which
And everybody
I
hated that, especially with the cutscene that I'm talking about, where we found out that the rune blade that Anduin was using, they used the like last sliver of Arthas's soul to make that and be able to control Anduin with it. And so when you kill off Anduin, you see the last sliver of Arthas, and it just fades away.
like Arthas is gone for good
Yeah,
now, which
and he was like
yeah, and
probably the most anticipated character that everybody wanted to see in the afterlife.
yeah, in a way, it felt like they did not want to waste him, but they were also like making Anduin a new Lich King, which did not make any sense the
No,
way they did it.
no,
Like
even
having
the resolution in the story, like where Sylvanas gets punished, for lack of a better term, and I guess they basically made it so that Anduin punishes himself and goes into the maw with Sylvanas. It's just it's
I,
hollow.
didn't- I thought Sylvanas just went alone. I did not know Anduin went with her.
Well,
I know Anduin's been gone for a
he
long
didn't go
time.
with her, but he followed after her. And so like in
Okay.
the what I can't remember what it was, the novel that came out right after Sepulchre, and it details Sylvanas. It basically tries to make sense of why Sylvanas sided with the jailer, and it doesn't work. Spoiler alert, it doesn't work. And they hint at it in the book where she's camping in the maw and she feels like she's being followed, and she suspects that is the little lion, which is what she calls Anduin.
Oh, okay. So it's never confirmed though.
No, well, it's subtly confirmed in a book, but they haven't shown it in the game. So you now have that weird gray area where whether or not it's canon, we don't know. But
Yeah, that's annoyed me in the past too. Like they have so much of the story in the books, which like
right.
I don't go out of my way to read those.
Mhm. Well, and the problem is, yeah, unfortunately, a lot of these books. I'm not saying that some of the books are hit and miss. Like there are solid misses there, and it's debatable whether or not the stuff is canon within it, and especially when the reception of said book is not good, then they will go out of their way to basically say, oh well, that wasn't really a thing. So at that point, it's one of those weird deals that Blizzard really needs to fix, because some of the events they put in these books, people wanted to see in the game, and I can totally understand. I think I've even talked to you about this, like post Mists of Pandaria, when they did the book War Crimes, where it was the trial of Garrosh Hellscream. You really should have done that in game, because a lot of players didn't realize that he'd already been tried, and he's the reason that Warlords kind of starts up.
Yeah, especially like at least like show it in the game.
Yes,
Maybe use the book to like flesh the stuff out a bit more.
right.
But that's like a key plot point. Like, okay, why is Garrosh over in Draenor now? How did he get there? Why? Like,
Yeah,
what made the events happen to be here?
right. So, kind of moving back on point. So, you had a lot of issues with it. I had a lot of issues with it where, because I wasn't raiding at that point, I was doing a little bit of Mythic Plus here and there with my guild. But because of the fact that, well, I'm a dad with two very little children, both on the spectrum, I can't really commit to a raid schedule. And when I can do Mythic Plus is when I can do Mythic Plus. So, most of the time, I'm doing solo. And the solo stuff, like there's a big reason why I called it the busy work expansion, because this is the expansion where they basically added in tons and tons of essential busy work, and I have no problem saying one of them was those goddamn sanctums. I'm just curious, did you finish your sanctum in Shadowlands? And if you did, when did you do it? Like what patch?
Um, like the class
Yeah,
sanctuaries.
the class or the order hall sanctuaries for the
Yeah.
covenants.
So I don't think I finished off any of them like completely.
Like most
There's
people.
I did yeah, like I also didn't feel like I had to do it because there wasn't anything like tied to player power other than the soul binds.
Right.
Like most of it was just cosmetics. So I was like, okay, I'll do the mission boards for some extra gold. I'll occasionally do the others if I feel like it.
Which is funny because
So
like you were raiding, so at that point you had the probably the best way to be able to get anima, which is basically how you fueled the sanctums. And I had the shittiest one because I had to go basically rely on weeklies and going into the maw every week and doing a little bit of Torghast here and there to be able to fill that out. And so I find it funny that you didn't finish, and I actually went out of my way to at least finish one sanctum, and it took me the entire fucking expansion to do it.
huh.
Do you want to know
Yeah,
how long it took me to finish up my Druid Order Hall in Legion? Nowhere near that time.
yeah, that one I like the order halls a lot more.
The
Just
Order
because
Halls are the best example, as far as I'm concerned. They figured
yeah,
the system out at that point.
I feel like they should just like kept us in the order halls or just have the thing we keep going back to every expansion is in like just a minor part,
Right.
because those are so cool.
And now
the others
they've
like
been used so little, and it's such a travesty too, because a lot of those lores, those lore essential things. I mean, Shadowlands, you got the Death Knights, so they got a lot of lore out of that. But if you were in any of the other order halls, you were lucky if you got anything. I mean, the priests got a little bit for BFA, but that's been about it. Like the Rogue Order Hall has never been touched. It's
yeah, it's a
ridiculous.
shame too because Legion did so many cool things, but then they just dropped after an expansion. They're trying to like capture what was good about them before, but they're just not the same.
Well, I'm guaranteeing you, 10 years down the road, people are going to look back on Legion and realize that it was a lot better than they thought it was. I get a lot of people's complaints with Legion, especially the what are they called? What are they called? The legendaries, where you had the mandatory legendaries you had to go out and find, and they were insane to go and figure out.
Yeah, it was all like super luck based.
Exactly, and they were basically essential if you wanted to be able to optimize your class. And so
Yeah,
people hate that stuff, but I have a feeling overall when people look back on Legion and see like all the things they did right in that expansion, it's going to overshadow a lot of the bad. But
yeah. I wish they like did Legion again, but did it learning what they like learning from their mistakes with it.
right. And they just haven't done that yet. But okay, so this was kind of our expansion or our viewpoints on Shadowlands going into Dragonflight. Um, when we were transitioning into that, was there any, like when they did the unveils and all that, was there anything in that reveal that excited you for Dragonflight? So the
Um,
biggest reveals there were like the reveal of the new talent point system that they did, and the dragon riding, which apparently everybody on the team loved and were doing endlessly.
I remember when I think we talked about this before. Like I saw that, and I was like very underwhelmed. Like
Mm-hmm.
I had already been like burned by Shadowlands. I saw that I was like, there's nothing here that really excites me. I like the idea of the evoker, but like
Yes.
that wasn't a big draw.
Yeah. So that was the other big thing too, is that we had a new race slash hero class, which was the Drak Evoker. And so at that point, a lot of people were interested in that because it was basically a dragon class. So a lot of like it was the closest thing to a dragonborn from D&D that you were ever going to get. And so, and on top of that, it was neutral, so you could pick Alliance or Horde, and you could, I believe the reason that we have the level of customization that we do now in Dragonflight is because of the customization they did for the Drak, because they literally went down every single detail to let people do everything that they wanted to do, not only with their dragon form, but also their visage, their human form out of that. So a lot of people I know love that. The dragon riding, I think we both were kind of just blah on it. It didn't really look
Yeah,
that interesting. And the talent revamp was probably the most interest we had, right?
yeah. I feel like from a gameplay perspective, the talents is like it is what it is. It didn't excite me,
Mm-hmm.
but I guess we'll get more into that later. But I'm glad that they did it the way that they did it.
Yes. So yeah, we'll get into that later, obviously. But so we we now cut to like the beginning of the Dragonflight expansion, and now we can get into how it actually ended up. So when Dragonflight launched, I mean, we just barely made the joke. You were sick as a dog when Dragonflight officially launched, but when you were actually able to get into the game, how are you feeling about how the game now played with all of the new systems in place for Dragonflight?
Yeah, and so when I played it, I was impressed with it.
Hmm.
Uh, I s- for the first patch, I was playing a mage, so I think I played fire and frost at first, then like switched to arcane later on.
Hmm.
I think fire, I like feel like it never felt as good as it should have, but frost and arcane were both fun.
Okay, that's
Uh,
interesting
so
because fire for the longest time was very hyped up in the mage. It was usually fire and then arcane for the last couple of expansions that have had a lot of love, unless you were doing PvP and then it was all frost.
yeah, so at the end of BFA, like I mained fire mage, and like it was super overpowered. Then
Yep.
I get why they toned it down some, but it was probably one of the most fun specs I'd ever played.
Hmm.
I played Fire Mage the last patch of Shadowlands, like season 3, and it was just like not the same. My group needed a mage. I figured, yeah, I might as well do it. I liked it before, but it did not feel as good. Shadowlands was better to some degree, but still just did not work as well.
See,
Though Arcane and Frost were pretty good, so that's fine.
right, because you're talking from like a class perspective. How do like in terms of the gameplay aspect? So I'll throw out a couple of details here. First of all, we didn't have an order hall, we didn't have a sanctum, we didn't have a war campaign or anything like that. We didn't even have a mission table. That didn't come back. Instead, we were just out there helping out the dragon aspects. And I guess the closest thing to a sanctum that we got was Valdrakken, which is the sanctuary city in the Dragon
Yeah,
Halls.
it's a capital
So,
city.
how did you
Yeah,
feel
and
about that? Where you didn't have that order hall, instead it was just kind of like, okay, we just have this general hub. We don't even have a table. We're working on other things.
so I like that they still had a lot to do, but there's very little you felt like you had to do.
Hmm.
Like every week you have like your renown quest, like get 3,000 red throughout it and do whatever event they have you do that week.
Right.
It's like something you can do. It will help you like unlock stuff, but if you don't, it's not like a big deal. Uh, you have like the world quests early on. There's useful gear from those, so very useful. You want to do those,
Yes.
but that's like a few a week.
Hmm.
Uh, a lot of times the reputations there'd be like maybe gear or like profession thing behind those, so you had a motivation to go do those. But what I liked is that there's stuff to do, but after a few weeks, when you like start getting tired of doing it, it was no longer useful. Then you could like focus more on your dungeons and raids if that's what you're doing.
Well, at that point, I would agree with you because what I think they did right in this case was in Shadowlands, everything was required. So if you wanted to just be a profession guy, you still had to go do the dungeons. You still had to go do the various reps and renowns with all of the different factions in order to be able to keep up to speed because everything was hidden behind everything. Whereas in this case, I think they did it right because they didn't like they do have things like weekly quests in this. Don't get me wrong, but they found ways to be able to make it necessary but not necessary. And that was probably the way to be able to do it. So like the example that I'm going to have is I think it's appropriate you brought it up is the weekly that you get in Valdrakken where you have to go and get 3,000 reputation with the various factions, which first of all I love because it's not locked behind a specific reputation or anything like that. It's just any kind of reputation that you earn.
It's like go do outdoor content. It doesn't matter what you do.
But not only that, they added an extra caveat onto it that would change each week. So, like, the first thing that you might get would be, oh, you need to go and do the Siege on Dragonbane Keep. And then you can get this, and you get a butt ton of rep, as well as a Valdrakken treasure cache and all of that. But then next week, it isn't that you need to go do the Siege on Dragonbane Keep. Now you have to go and do the what was it? The group
The like cooking one
the
or
group cooking event. And so at that point, it wasn't the same thing every single effing day. Whereas with Shadowlands, it was like, oh, you need to go and accrue this butt ton of anima. How do you do that? Oh, you need to go and get like the highest sources first, and then maybe you'll get done like 3 or 4 days into it. Instead, we had a lot of other shit to do that we were motivated in.
yeah. And I like that there's like the two things you do for the weekly quest, and by doing like the one-off event, you also got reps. So that means it made it feel really good. You're progressing on both ways.
And it's not getting old. Especially since we're once again stuck in one continent. You're probably going to see Azure Span and Onaran Plains way more than you want to, even even though like compared to other expansions, it's only been out there a year. I have no problem telling you I'm tired of seeing Azure Span, just because I have to go there all the time for crafting and whatever. So yeah, they found ways to change it up and not make things essential but not essential. And you brought this up, so I want to get into this really quick. The profession overhaul in Dragonflight. How do you feel about what they did with the professions this time around?
So I mostly like it. I feel like it needs a bit of refinement. So I
Agreed.
like
Yeah.
because yeah. So I like having like the skill trees. You can like specialize in various things, like get really good at
Yeah.
something. And that just feels good. Like, oh, I can now make tier 3 flasks or whatever without having like get lucky procs and stuff like
Right.
that. It also just felt good. Like, okay, I can it gave you a way to progress your character like week by week
Hmm.
without it being tied directly to player power.
Right. Yeah. Because
So
in this
like,
one there is no player power. The closest thing that there is reputation.
well, yeah, but there is also player power. Like my Death Knight is a jewel crafter.
Oh yeah.
I
Okay.
made my own ring. So it's like, okay, as I can now I can make like a 5-star ring. That gives me better gear because of my professions.
Hmm.
But it's also like a small enough that if I don't do it, that's fine too.
Right. You don't have
So at
to,
least for me,
but it's
yeah,
gonna
they like
help
hit
you.
yeah, they hit the balance where it's like it feels good to progress toward that,
Hmm.
but it's also does not feel required.
Exactly. And I've done both the crafting and the gathering professions, and I have no problem saying I'm a little bit more loving of the gathering professions and what they did with this. But I will tell you one thing that I think was a huge improvement, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, because I'm guessing you said you had a jewel crafter, so you probably have other crafting professions. How do you feel now that you don't have to go out to the middle of Orgrimmar or Stormwind and just spam, I can make these recipes, come and ask me to make something, and instead you have the crafting order system now?
Yeah, I think it's definitely an improvement. I like never like professions for me are like a secondary thing, so I'd never like go advertise it.
Hmm.
Like I'd make it for myself, make it for if a guildy wanted it, or it'd be like, oh, I see there's a way I can make profit. Okay, I'll craft these, throw them on the auction house.
Right. And I actually like that because you don't have to just have put out general orders. I can put out a specific order for you that I know you can do, and tip you and whatnot. And also I know that you can make it of a specific quality, so at that point I can
Right.
specifically target you, or I can target somebody within my guild. um
Yeah, and
yeah, I love that.
yeah, I think there's some like issues with it, but I think that's like just broader with the economy being like too much supply of everything, like pushing prices down too much to make it feel less good.
Right.
But I think the work orders are good. I like the profession trees. I feel like at some point though, it'd be good if there's like a way to catch up on the profession knowledge
There is actually.
because like, is it like a full catch up or?
So what it is unfortunately it requires the artisan metal in order to be able to do it. But now I actually found this out on my alts because uh, that's actually been one of my complaints. They now have three different catch-up books that can be bought for, I think it's 100, 150, and 200 artisan
Oh,
metals
those.
that will give you 15 to 20 points that you can immediately
Uh,
put into the talent system.
yeah, they do have that. It's gated by rep though, and they're also like one-time use.
Yeah, so they still have the rep gates and everything like that. But one thing I have noticed is that guilds especially have been abusing the hell out of that specifically, so that as soon as they have one jewel crafter that knows all of the really good recipes, they immediately move to the second one. So and they just feed every order to them, and then at that point they can get their jewel crafting or their tailoring or their enchanting up super fast. So I do like the fact that with the guild orders they did that so that the guilds can kind of prioritize, this is our leather worker, he gets everything first.
Okay.
So
Yes, I guess that would work too. Yeah, the issue is like, yes, you can get those. That gives you like probably like 30 knowledge, which definitely helps.
right.
But it's like if I don't do the quests for a week, I'm permanently behind that much knowledge. And again, it is professions. It doesn't matter too much, so it's kind of okay. But it does feel bad. Like starting a new profession, know it's going to be months before I can like fully specialize in anything.
Right. Um, so we have the profession system. We have a lot of the main world changes. How did you feel about the story moving into this? So let me kind of set a timeline here, and then we won't worry about 10.1 just yet. But like the way that the timeline kind of starts up with this is in the Drakthir starting zone. And then, if you remember, they have those motion comics that they release like weeks before the expansion launches to just kind of hype it. Those legacies motion comics were then in that timeline where they were kind of showing where one of the Drakthir was talking to Nosdormu to get caught up on the events, because one of the big things of the Drakthir is they don't know what's happened the last 20,000 plus years uh, versus when they were working for, at that point, Neltharion. And then at that point, we now have the new villain that gets unleashed, which introduces us to the Primal Incarnates, which are basically dragons that refused the Titan's gift, as opposed to the dragon aspects, which we're very familiar with. And instead, these guys took on elemental type of properties. How did you feel about the story setting up this obviously brand new villain into the Dragon Isles?
Yeah, I was a bit skeptical. Like, I like the dragon aspects. I've always found them like to be fun characters.
Mhm.
So that the premise was interesting. The new villains I had like never seen before, I wasn't too excited for, but I was also willing to give it a chance.
Right.
I found that the story of this expansion though has been very different than I think anything World of Warcraft has done
It's
before,
very
or at least
pleasantly
to this
surprising.
degree.
I'll give you that.
Yeah, so it's good, but it's also different. So I've seen like a lot of posts talk about the story,
Mhm.
and I feel like typically what they do is like having like really big epic stories, like focus on like the a wider conflict, very story focused. While the characters are there, they feel like they are like more heroes and villains as opposed to people. I
Yes.
feel like Dragonflight is doing the opposite of that though. Is focusing on the characters as people beyond them being heroes and villains.
I would agree. I'm not going to say it's perfect though. They have had some missteps here and there. In particular, I haven't seen this quest myself because I'm actually starting up a whole new series on my channel called Questing with Drak, where I'm actually going to go over the story of Dragonflight in detail. But I have heard of a misstep in regards to the Green Dragonflight, and in regards to one of my favorite lore-based characters, Malfurion Stormridge. Now, I haven't seen that in particular, but there's a joke basically going on around online called Cucktherian, and I know enough to be able to tell you it's probably accurate, and that's really sad. But overall, like it's not a perfect story, but it has done a lot right,
Yeah,
especially in regards to
I
the dragon aspects.
yeah, and I feel like I do like what they're doing. It's also it seems to be less about the big picture and more about the individual stories.
Right.
Like we're getting the individual stories of each flight. Like you have the Green Dragon flight to Sarah, her daughter, her taking the role of the aspect. You have the Blue Dragon flight. I have not done the Blue Dragon flight quest. I heard is really good, but that's
Yeah, they
another like
added on to it. If you've done the Azure span, it basically expands into that. What one thing I like about this is that each Dragonflight is dealing with their own unique respective problems at this point.
right.
So, like for example, the Black Dragonflight is busy fighting amongst itself to be able to claim a leader. Specifically, the two big ones that are standing out are Rathian and Sibelian. Or in the case of the Blue Dragonflight, where they've been dealing with the problem of ever since Kalagos has become the aspect that they all just kind of want to go and do their own thing, and Kalagos wants to bring them all back together to be able to make the Blue Dragonflight strong again. And it's different for each one of the aspects, and for the most part, they are all interesting to be able to go into individually. The one I would say
Yeah.
I have a complaint with is the Red Dragonflight, and primarily it's because the only story that they want to tell is that most of the incarnate stuff is done through Alex Straza. And if I had a complaint with how the dragon aspects are being portrayed here, Alex Straza would definitely be one, because I think they've lost a lot of what made Alex Straza interesting to a lot of people. She used to be like the nurturing mother of the world, and she's now she borders between being a Hollywood mom where she like only cares about you when people are looking, or she also tends to be the one that's like, "Oh, punish me. I've done everything wrong." And it gets annoying to deal with. If I had one complaint, it would be Alexstrasza, and that's probably it.
Yeah, I feel like they have not done as much with the red dragons and her as they have with the others.
Yes.
And it could be like they're building the others up, and then like she'll get more focus
Mhm.
in like 10-2, which also I don't know if that would fit because they're going to the dream, and that's more like the green Dragonflight.
Mhm.
But still, they can definitely do multiple ones there.
Yeah,
Uh,
and one of the biggest examples that people want it, I will give, is the Waking Shores storyline, because like the whole premise of all this is that we have to restore the aspect stones, right? And it turns out that the way that so she was trying to figure out how the red aspect stone can be rejuvenated, and it turns out that if she'd actually just helped out the other dragonflights more, she would have restored that aspect stone a lot faster than she actually did. In fact, because she refused to help out Rathian, it actually took longer for her to restore that, until she finally realized, oh, I should have been helping everybody else out. Why didn't I think of that? Whereas the Alexstrasza 2 expansions ago would have totally gone that direction.
yeah, and like trying to take care of all the
Right.
dragonflights, not just
It
hers.
wouldn't just be, oh, I need to worry just about my clutch. No, like the Alexstrasza in the past is thinking about all of the dragonflights as a whole. And this one was very self-focused and self-loathing, and it's very irritating to deal with. But that's the only complaint that I would have with the stories that they've done. Before we get into additional story that happened with like 10-1 and everything like that, we have to approach this because I know some people are going to ask. Dragon riding. Now that you have your hands on it, was it worth the wait?
I mean, I like it.
Mm-hmm.
I also feel like the spark of it has worn off.
Mm-hmm.
Though I also don't want them to take it away in the future expansions. So
No, I like the concept of the dragon riding. I think it was an interesting idea. I just don't think that the entire expansion should have been hyped around it, because in the long term, Dragonflight is basically a glorified Star Fox minigame in Dragonflight, because most of the time when you're using it, either you're using it for the stuff you would use a regular flying mount for, or you're doing those dragon racing daily or world quests and it's flying through rings. So
yeah, it's fine. I can't complain about it,
yeah,
but it's not like an expansion selling feature for me.
right. If I had to say like the expansion selling features for a lot of people that I've talked to, and I think yourself is included in that, is the talent revamp was obviously something that people were begging for at that given moment. Also, some of the changes that they did to Mythic Plus and to, I don't want to say there were too many changes for rating, but Mythic Plus got a lot of benefits out of it. Plus the world itself, because the renown grind wasn't as essential. You could sit back and do things at your own pace. Yes, they were something that you had to do each week if you wanted to be able to get ahead of the curve, but you didn't have to, as opposed to previous expansions.
Yeah, I think the best thing about this expansion is that it did not get in its own way.
Yes.
It's like have great basically like have raids, have dungeons, have world content, have a few cool events, and then don't mess up.
Right. And I tend to agree, especially because now we can kind of transition into 10-1, because like you were saying, we shouldn't get in our own way. And one of the reasons that 10-1 happens is because we got in our own goddamn way. Because we were dealing with one Primal Incarnate up until that point, and then we go into the Vault of the Incarnates, and we kill that one only to release her 3 buddies.
Yeah, the other 3.
And so at that point, now we have 3 whole new problems, and turns out they were way more powerful than the original one we dealt with. And so at that point, now we have to worry about them. In particular, they the first thing they did was they opened up the Forbidden Reach, which is the Drakthir starting zone, to allow for people to have a lot of rep or renown catch-up mechanics, which I thought was a great idea. Because I
Yeah.
already saw a lot of people in my guild complaining about the renown grind because they were doing raiding. And so when
So I think that was actually like 1007, not 10-1.
yeah. So I'm transitioning into it, but
Okay.
yeah. So we had that. Plus, we had the 411 ring that came from the Zaskira vaults. So at that point, that was a really interesting catch-up mechanic for alts, because it was a 411 ring that you could basically customize, much like the trinket that you got from Mechagon, where you could put in different traits for it.
Well, it was more than just catch up. Like it was best in slot for most
For a long
classes.
time, yeah.
Uh, yeah, like at the for 1007, it was nice because it like gave you a boost for the raid, like to help you get over the last couple of bosses.
Yeah.
It was also I think it was probably too good for 10-1 because like you would have to go back and grind it if you didn't already have
Well, I
it.
know it helped out in the mythic push of Vault of the Incarnates because basically at that point the world first people had gone through, and so the 411
Right.
ring gave a lot of people a means to be able to do the remainder, so that we had more people finishing Mythic Vault than we did Mythic Sepulchre. I think another thing
Yeah,
that
and that
also helped with that was the reintroduction of the catalyst system and allowing that to be a end game at start feature so that people could get to their 2 sets and their 4 set bonuses quicker.
yeah, the ring actually helped my guild get heroic there. We basically got some people who had to like take step away from the game for a long time because of various reasons. So like that slowed our raid progression.
Right.
So like having that ring helped us get a boost to finish it off.
Yeah, no, my guild was advertising it too because at that time people were kind of hitting that slog of like, we're so sick and tired of seeing vaults. We really want to get into somewhere else. And so at that point, they could allow for people to take breaks and bring in new people who had their, what was it called? The Onyx Amulet. They had their amulet all figured out and they were actually like not being carried. They were actually holding their own. And my guild has like, they do mythic a little bit, but primarily we're like a normal to heroic guild and keep it
Right.
at that kind of approach. So I like that, and I thought it was a really good catch up there. Then we actually open things up to a whole new zone, which is in 10.1, and that is the Zarelek Cavern. So now we have a whole new zone. We have a whole new sub story that we can go into, a whole new raid in Aberrus, as well as a new dragon riding mount that people can get, a whole new renown faction that they can work on, new additional weeklies that you can do, but you're not forced to do, and we just have a whole new area to be able to go and explore instead of having to deal with Anaran plains all the freaking time. And one thing I will also say was a pleasant surprise for this expansion as opposed to Shadowlands, and it is shown very well in 10.1. This expansion is a much more alt-friendly expansion than Shadowlands ever was. And actually, one thing that might throw people off, it's also a lot more alt-friendly than I think Legion was, and everybody knows how much I frickin' love Legion.
Yeah, I feel like all the expansions have been like alt unfriendly until the very
They
end.
really have been. Yeah, and this is the first one that's been very alt-friendly.
Yeah, because like BFA, you had your cloak, and that what you would get behind on that.
Right.
Legion, you had like all the artifact power, your legendaries, and all that. Shadowlands is probably more alt friendly just because they're like you could jump through the hoops
Well,
quicker
because
and
of
easier.
Torghast, it was easier to get the required legendary. And then
Yeah, so you
and
could
then on top of that, once they added in things like the catalyst system, and everybody could have their tier bonuses like out in the world, and it was a single player kind of thing, that helped things tremendously for alts, especially since a lot of the Zareth Morth's features were account bound. They weren't bound to necessarily that same character.
yeah, I forget what those features were.
They
I
had I can't remember what it was called. They had the talent tree for it, which was like all of the
yeah,
Zareth Mortis perks and all of that.
right.
But
So there's some stuff in there, but that just didn't stand out. But yeah, Dragonflight is basically like get caught up on your gear, and that's all. And
yes,
you can like grind mythics to do that. You might take a little bit while, but yeah, like that. You have the raid. You have the gear upgrades, which are a very interesting part of 10.1 and now
well,
10.2.
and on top of that, the other thing that I would say it makes it even better than Shadowlands in terms of the alt friendly catch up mechanics is you had the so in Shadowlands we did get like the tokens that you can give that are like plate gloves, and you can give those to your alts, right? Those were there starting in Sanctum of Domination or 9.1. But here they were a lot more prevalent a lot earlier because you were able to start getting those in the Forbidden Reach. So you were able to start the catch up mechanics fairly well, at least to get yourself ready for Vault of the Incarnates. And then we got the introduction of the upgrade system and how that works in 10.1, which for those who don't know, basically Valor got replaced with Flight Stones. and now we have the various crests that allow for us to upgrade our gear a lot easier, much like how a lot of people have actually been bringing this to my attention, but PvP has been using this upgrade system since the beginning of Dragonflight, and there were actually a lot of hardcore world first raiding guilds that were doing world firsts in PvP gear because they could upgrade it.
Huh, okay, that's interesting.
So they actually
Yeah,
brought
if
it
you're
over in 1007 for us because everybody was using the PvP gear. So at that point, I thought that was an amazing thing that they could have done. The only thing that I don't like about it, but I've heard is getting fixed in 10.2, is being able to properly either transform your crests or being able to transform the gear into the next track. So going from champion to hero kind of thing.
Yeah, so they are doing that, kind of. There's, like, a couple catches on it.
Hmm.
You basically need to have, like, if you wanna go from, like, the normal track to the heroic track, you need to have all your gear at the normal item level or higher,
Yes.
and then you can do, like, a 6-to-1 trade up to the next level.
Yep. And not only that, but also, if you remember in 9.1, they introduced the, oh, I can't remember what they were called. They were the Sanctum Assaults in the Maw, so that you had that catch-up mechanic to be able to get your ults up to speed. And so they introduced something similar here with the Suffusion Camps, so that you could get some
Right.
gear to be able to at least get you into Zarelek Caverns, so that you could then start up the basics of Avarice
Yeah.
at that point.
Yeah, because I think the whatever those were, you can get up to, like, I think a 415 piece of gear sometimes, or, like,
Hmm.
once a week, which is, like, a normal raid gear equivalent, so that
Yes.
can get you gear up for Avarice. There's also just, like, a lot of other, like, lower level gear they'll give you,
Well,
which also
originally
helps.
it would give you as early as like 400. Like 400 was the regular one, and if you were really lucky, you got a 415 out of it. Um,
Okay, maybe that's what it
that's what
was.
they did because we'll get into this later, but eventually more catch up mechanics were brought in to be able to help out with the Avarice progression in the next storyline. But we at least got to have an interesting story take with the Black Dragonflight now that they are actually learning about just how bad Daddy Dearest actually was. And
Right.
actually, I've
So
since seen the story of Avarice, and it does a great job of being able to showcase that maybe Neltharion wasn't there, it actually was Deathwing.
yeah, what I found interesting about Avarice is from a character perspective, I think it has the best storytelling of any raid they've done.
Yeah. No, I love a lot of the storytelling that they actually did because it filled in a lot of the gaps that a lot of people have not understood about why Neltharion, the Black Dragon aspect, eventually became Deathwing. And in this raid, you basically slowly see the fall. And
Yeah,
you
like,
see it through
yeah,
you see it through the eyes of two potential dragon aspects and one who isn't really trying, along
yeah,
with
you
two
have,
other
like,
Drak-Theer characters.
yeah, because you have, like, Rathian and Civilion who, like, they look up to Neltharion,
Yes.
he's their father, and, like, they know the whole Deathwing thing, but they don't think this is him, but they see all this stuff and, like, yeah, maybe he wasn't that great to begin
Well,
with.
they basically are both approaching it from the angle of like, oh, well, I totally wouldn't listen to those whispers, and then they come down to the Zarelek Caverns, and the whispers are very overpowering for them, and they can't avoid it at
Yeah.
all. And then they go into Aberrus, and they start to notice because Sibelian got some access to Deathwing, Rathian never did. But then they start to notice, wow, he is kind of a dick. And then eventually, when you get to the actual Neltharion fight, it turns out it is a faceless watcher who has been basically trying to make them become another Deathwing.
Yeah, which, like, that's a whole different thing, like, the Faceless, the Void, all that
Yeah,
involvement there.
and the best part is that they actually get to see what they would have looked like if they actually did embrace the Void because of Sarkareth and the fact that
Yes.
he fell to the Void. So
Yeah,
I love
and
it.
yeah, again, I think definitely I think just the raid as a whole is one of the better raids they've had,
Yes.
at least since Castle Nathria, if not more.
Yeah, I would. So again, I haven't done the Shadowlands raids at all. I maybe have seen like one wing of Nathria. The last one that I saw Um, well, the last one that I did with a raid team was Emerald Nightmare, but since then, because of transmog and all that, I've been able to see Nighthold, I've been able to see Tomb of Sargeras, and even some of the BFA raids. And I can already tell you, like they've stepped up the storytelling in these areas quite a bit. And Aberrus is no exception to this because there was a ton of gaps when it came to the Deathwing lore. And so they basically had a field day trying to fill all of that in. And it turns out so well in this case. Like I have not seen the Shadowlands raids, but I hope that they have the same level of storytelling here that they did or there than they did here.
Yeah, I actually wonder, do you think they regretted killing Deathwing off as early as they did?
Maybe the new writing team did, but here's the thing is that because he gave I don't think we're done seeing Deathwing because at that by the time we actually finished him in the Dragon Soul, he was so far gone to the old gods, it would not surprise me that it would be just as easy to resurrect him as it would be to resurrect, say, an old god. And if
Oh,
you
that could be
and if you
interesting.
guys don't think those old guards aren't getting resurrected eventually, I guarantee you they're coming.
Or like resurrect an old god merged with him or
Hmm.
something. Because that would be a very interesting way. Like have Rathion, Sibelion, Abyssian,
Actually,
basically
you want to know?
the new Black
Do you
Dragons
want to know one thing
have to
I
fight
want to do
against him.
now with you specifically? So I've been working in the background, and I'll tease this now, but I mentioned this to you as well as to Brinton. Like, I want to do videos on how they kind of wrecked certain expansions, and one of the ones I want to do is BFA because, in my opinion, it should have been advertised more as an old god expansion than an Alliance versus Horde one because ultimately that's what it ended up being. And one of the things I've been working on is redoing the story for Nyalotha because of the fact it is the
Oh,
Zoth and everything like that. I would love to send you my draft and just
y-
let you see what you think of what I've done.
yeah, because like the BFA is like it had three different storylines going at once.
Yes,
And it's like they kept like bouncing between this because like they had the Alliance versus Horde,
they
they
had
had the Sylvanas.
their own internal politics going on.
Yeah, they had like the Sylvanas and Death and the Jailer like building up to that, but
Mhm.
that's still like a whole separate thing than everything
Not
else.
only that, but you
And
also
then they
had the
had
Kultiran storyline that was going on along with the Zandalari storyline going on,
right,
and then you
which
had the
I feel
subtle old god.
yeah. So it's like they had three or four different things. They could have made a whole expansion out of any one of them,
Right.
and it might have been better if they did to like fully tell that story instead of just like going through like old gods, finish off Nazoth, even though it did not feel like it made sense to.
Yes. So I'll actually give you a little bit of a hint here because I think that this would have been a better way to advertise Battle for Azeroth. So you remember the cinematic that we got for Battle for Azeroth, which was the battle at the Undercity and having the epic moments with Anduin and with Sylvanas. You know, the for the Horde, for the Alliance, etc. The way that I basically put it is what I think they tried to do with BFA and it kind of failed was they tried to keep the subtlety of the old gods, and in turn, they kept it way too subtle. And so at that point, the old gods got overshadowed by a lot of things. And once they actually came into the picture, they kind of were an afterthought until about Nyalotha. And so basically,
Right.
one of the things that I did as okay, we're going to keep the cinematic and we're going to have the for the Horde and for the Alliance, etc. But one thing I do know is that since we got the motion comic that showcased Nazoth, so we knew he had a voice actor at that point. I literally would have ended it when it has like the globe on the World of Warcraft logo, and all of a sudden you'd start hearing,
Oh yeah,
and
maybe
it
like get
starts
the
going dark.
and like have the like the old god tentacles like around the
Well,
logo.
that's what I would basically do is that the globe would eventually just start having tentacles coming down it. And so at
Oh
that point,
yeah,
that keeps the subtlety that it is going to be old god focused, but it will still have this alliance versus horde aesthetic because now we know that the old gods are basically pitting them against each other. And
yeah,
so,
and like
yeah,
and I feel like they should have had like more like a bigger bridge between like the subtle storytelling and them occasionally showing up
Right.
or like hints of them versus Ny'alotha, which is like all old
Well,
gods.
at that point, they were just like, "Oh no, we have to go full bore into this because now it's N'Zoth," and they did very little to advertise N'Zoth up until the Eternal Palace. I mean, yes, we did get the what was it, the Sanctuary of the Storms, the two boss
Oh,
raid encounter. We
right.
got that. Plus, you got the Xalatath story in there, but you everything else was so freaking subtle that it could have easily. A lot of people just took that as gentle nods to Lovecraft instead of referencing old gods. And that's the thing, is
feel
the
like
old gods are references to Lovecraft.
yeah, which feels weird. Like, well, if you know WoW, you know, like, yes, those are old god related,
Yes.
but it's like they're there, but it's not like it drives the old god storytelling
No.
forward any.
No,
The
they
only
have
thing it
their own
really did
story.
was, yeah, like the only thing that drove the old god story forward was Ny'alotha. All the rest, like, it was there, but that was like nothing going forward
Yeah.
with it.
So again, we are finding ourselves way off track a lot of the time, but I'm actually loving a lot of the story because this kind of goes back into, wow, wouldn't it be great if Deathwing actually came back as like a void servant or something like that? And I'm guaranteeing you, he's not done. We will see Deathwing reappear because pretty much as we know with Xalatath, these guys come back and they come
Yeah,
back in some way or another.
yeah, like Xalatath, the other one, Primal, after like the story in 1015,
Mhm.
whose name I forget.
And here's the thing too, is like we can't even rule out that the incarnates aren't void related because they basically are embodiments of the elements, and one of the biggest servants of the old gods is the elements. So
Oh,
in
yeah.
fact, one of the things
Which,
I find funny is in Amir Drasil in 10.2, one of the boss encounters is Smolderon, who, if people did the shaman campaign in Legion,
oh, is he like the Druid of the Flame guy?
no, Smolderon is the guy who takes over for Ragnaros as the Fire Lord.
Ah,
So you
okay.
actually do a quest in the Shaman Order Hall campaign to install him as the new Fire Lord. And
Okay,
so
yes.
now
I did
he's your
that, but it's
enemy.
been like a long time.
Yeah, no. A lot of
Interesting.
people don't know that. He's been part of the lore for quite a while now.
Well, this is why we need to like keep the order halls going. Like, do like this patch, like have a story with the shamans where they like get into that, they see him turn against
I've
him.
heard that in the PTR there are noddings towards it. There are some placeholder
Okay.
items that will start up a quest. So I'll be very interested in that. And I also heard that he's got some cosmetics that will come with him as well, because I know a bunch of Druid cosmetics are coming in Amir Drasil,
Yeah.
including
I
new
mean, just
rune bears, and I'm very excited for those.
just like have a whole like shaman story based around
Yeah,
that. Like keep, like bring the class focus of Legion, like move it forward with the rest of the story.
mhm.
Don't have to do that like with every class, every
Yeah.
patch or
Druids
whatever.
obviously have that focus. They do in Amir Drasil, but then you also have elements that are being brought in where the Drak are obviously getting a focus because they're trying to help out after learning their past. And then you also have the shamans who are part of this as well, because the Earthen Ring is just as much dedicated to the Emerald Dream as the Druids are.
Okay, yeah, I
So
forgot about them.
yeah, so at that point, I love where a lot of this is going. But the next thing that I want to bring up is, so the next thing that came out was 10.1. Actually, I think it was 10.1.2, and
Was there a 10-1?
this was the intro.
There's
What was that?
there's a 10-1-5. I didn't know if there's a 10-1-2.
It might have been 10.1.5. So 10.1.5 is the introduction of the mega dungeon for this expansion, which was the Dawn of the Infinite. So this is where Nozdormu gets some focus. And they did a couple of interesting gameplay things here that I kind of want to get into as well. But overall, we got a new mega dungeon, which is the Dawn of the Infinite. Ultimately, we go into the Sanctum of the Bronze Dragonflight, and we get to deal with an enemy we haven't dealt with in a long time, the Infinite Dragonflight, and what their goals are. And so we got that mega dungeon. Overall, very good as far as I'm concerned, but then we also got a lot of quality of life things being added to it. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of the Aberrus catch-up stuff was then put into these new time rifts that would
I
happen
forgot about the
across.
time rifts.
Yeah, the time rifts happened along with the
Yeah.
story with Nozdormu. So you had another catch-up mechanic that could bring people even higher up into Aberrus, and also you could use this for your alts. So that was actually a really great thing that they did to be able to push that forward. And they basically, in a way, replaced the suffusion camps, but not really, because you could still do the suffusion camps along with that. So solo players like myself had additional catch-up mechanics that we could utilize.
What I like too is that like every 2 months they have a new thing to do outside.
But the most interesting thing that we had here, and actually we're dealing with it right now, this is the last week of it, this was the introduction of the first Turbulent Timeways event, which for those who don't know what that is, it is 6 straight weeks of time walking. So for all the people who love doing the time walking, especially for alts, because that's probably the best way to level the alts, aside from doing the quest lines in Dragonflight, you have 6 straight weeks of being able to do nothing but time walking is the weekly event. And, you know, we usually have like PvP events and world quest events going on in the middle of that. So you've got those as yet another major catch-up mechanic for alts. So this was very alt-friendly walking into it. Plus, it also gave people like you who are raiding something else to do with Dawn of the Infinite. And this is actually where I also want to mention another major thing that they've been doing in the Mythic Plus front is you've been here since Cataclysm. So you're going to understand you're going to understand what I'm about to go into. You're in a new expansion and you see nothing but those dungeons for the better part of a year. And you are so sick and tired of them, you literally want to go do anything else. In fact, time rocking is like a reprieve at that point, because at least you're seeing something different. And in this case, with the Mythic Plus, they actually decided, okay, we're not going to make all of the Dragonflight dungeons Mythic Plus eligible. In Season 1, we're going to cut the dungeon count in half, and then with the other half of those Mythic Plus dungeons, we're going to take old content and bring it in as Mythic Plus, just to give people other things to do. And this is actually one of the things I liked from Shadowlands that they did near the end, was the integration of older Mythic Plus dungeons, just so that we didn't have to say the same fucking Theater of Pain and Sanguine Depths, and I can't even remember what the Ardenweald one was. And the other side, we could see other things, Rising Sun. Heaven forbid we could go to the Temple of the Jade Serpent instead of Ruby Life Pools. Oh my god.
Yeah, and it's that like as a raider, it's like it didn't really bother me.
No,
but
it's
like every
refreshing
season,
for a lot of players.
Yeah, and like every season, I get a new raid. This way, every season you get another batch of Mythic Plus dungeons.
Exactly. So, like, I just want to give people a feeling of like what we had for those, because I mean, obviously, there's going to be seasonal affixes and everything like that, but this is basically what we had for the dungeon pool for it. So obviously we had 4 Dragonflight dungeons of the 8. So we had Ruby Life Pools, Algathar Academy, the Azure Vault, and the Noku Defensive. Then we also had Halls of Valor, Court of Stars, both from Legion, Shadowmoon Burial Grounds from Warlords, and the Temple of the Jade Serpent from Mists, which, for the record, is one of my favorite dungeons. So the fact that it got included here, I was very happy.
Well, it's also like they have so many expansions of great dungeons,
yes,
that we're just like sitting there. You get time walking from time to time.
Well, and this is a promise from Season 4 of Shadowlands, is that they want to start integrating a lot of these into it, so that at that point, we're not getting bored of the same fucking 8 dungeons an entire expansion.
Yeah, and when they have like 100 dungeons total, probably, it's like, use that batch of 100 to make things more interesting.
Exactly. And so here's the other example. So when 10.1 rolled around, we got Season 2, and they changed up the pool again. So we got the last 4, which were Brackenhide Hollow, Halls of Infusion, Uldaman Legacy of Tyr, and Neltharis. But then we also got Freehold, the Underrot, both Battle for Azeroth Mythic Plus dungeons, and already built for Mythic Plus, Neltharian's Lair, and they spent some time working on a Cataclysm dungeon and brought the Vortex Pinnacle into it, which tells me that it's not just we're not going to go beyond Warlords of Draenor, which were already built for this in mind, we're going to go to things like Mists of Pandaria, which technically had some of that framework, but then we're going to go even further back to the Vortex Pinnacle and start integrating those into these.
Yeah, like I really like that because like when I first started playing, that was Cataclysm, so the Vortex Pinnacle brings back a lot of memories. It's fun to do again, and it's also fun as someone who doesn't play Mythic Plus often, like to go into a new season and already mostly know half the dungeons.
Exactly. And on top of that, you have to see the same dungeon over and over and over again because you're waiting for that one trinket that is going to make you an uber tank or an uber healer, and it's only in this one dungeon, and so you basically have to pray to the RNGesus gods and hope that it drops the 30th time instead of the 60th. And so at that point, with these changes, we could then change up a lot of the gear pool as well, and old trinkets become relevant again, and old necks and old uh, capes and other side items become relevant again. And so that at that point, our buddies over at Blizzard don't have to design a bunch of new dungeon gear and how it's going to work and how to balance it. They can focus on it in a smaller way. And the funniest thing is that so going into 10.2, this is the dungeon pool that we have. And funniest thing, Dragonflight dungeons are not in it. And I think that's actually a good idea.
There are the two of them are the Wings of the Dawn of the Infinite.
Yes, so those will be here, but that's the mega dungeon, so it makes sense that it would be there. Plus, a lot of the trinkets and stuff like that are still BIS.
Yeah, and then so they're doing like those two, and then 6 older ones, which I think like Throne of the Tides is one.
Yeah, so this is coming all the way back from Cataclysm. So this is the one that they're retooling. Then we have Waycrest Manor, Atal Dazar from Battle for Azeroth, Darkheart Thicket and Blackrock Hold from Legion, and the Everbloom. So you can obviously tell there's a little bit of a nature vibe that's going, or a nature Emerald Dream lore kind of thing going into it, which is what I wanted to see them do. Is that eventually they could go, oh, we're going to go into this dungeon with this particular boss. Let's go ahead and fuel the lore so that everybody knows what they're walking into.
Yes, that's a good way to do it too. Like they have so many dungeons, use them.
Exactly. And this actually will go into the next expansion, into one of the things that I would like to see improve from it. But yeah, so I wanted to bring this up, but it's just very interesting. You know, we've mentioned this expansion has been so alt friendly right off the bat. It allows for so many catch up mechanics. I mean, eventually we did outgrow the ring. And so at that point we didn't, like, Raiders didn't necessarily need to have it anymore, but they instead subbed that in with, oh, maybe there's a ring from Dawn of the Infinite that you need. Maybe there's a trinket from Dawn of the Infinite. And so at that point, they're keeping people in current content, but also catching them up very quickly so that they can get right back into the raiding. And the raid teams don't have to suffer from it. They can continue their Aberrus progression. So go ahead.
So I was going to ask, have you done Dawn of the Infinite on the Mythic difficulty?
I have not done it on the Mythic difficulty, but I have done the Heroic difficulty because...
Okay, so like my guilder, as part of it, did it like the week before the Heroic came out.
Mm-hmm.
Like we had finished raid, we're looking for stuff to do. My game time was about to run out, so I was like, so we decided, oh, let's do this for a night or two. We got through like I think 5 or 6 bosses, and like it was a great dungeon.
Yeah.
It was extremely hard, but that was also a good thing.
That's one of the things I've really liked about introducing mega dungeons, is because they've all been very interesting. And since I'm not actively raiding, I'm usually one of the guys that gets brought in to gear the new guys. And because I can do the mythic, you know, like that's 5 people. I don't have to worry about that. And I'm a tank. So at that point, or usually I'm playing a tank character. So at that point, that's what they need. So like for me, I've been doing this since back in Legion, where they had Karazhan. Loved that. Then I went and helped out a little bit with Mechagon. Loved that. And then I also did Tazavesh in Shadowlands, and even that was enjoyable. And Dawn of the Infinite is no exception. I actually do like this, and kind of hope that if they continue the Caverns of Time storyline, that they learn from Dawn of the Infinite and find other ways to be able to integrate this stuff.
And I also think the Dawn of the Infinite story was a very interesting one too.
Yes. No,
So
I
it's like
agree
they
completely.
yeah, so the gameplay was great. It was a great way to like push forward the Bronze Dragonflight story and everything there.
Mhm.
Eridicon, you also had him involved in the Void.
That was
It's
actually
like
one of the things I really liked out of it was that they found a way to be able to bring Iridicron into it to continue to make him the evil in the background,
right.
which that's what we've been painting him as, but then also having the focus on the Infinite Dragonflight and their goals.
It was also really interesting too. Like we got to fight Eridicon and even beat him, but because that led to Murzon come out, we had to like undo that or reverse time to
Right.
undo that, which like you could say like that's a cheap use of time travel, but it fits perfectly for the Bronze Dragonflight and their powers. So that was a great way to
Not
do
only
it.
that, but it played into the Infinite because they knew that we would have to reverse time to fix this.
Exactly.
Hence why we got for those who had been following the story, we got to meet like all of the different alternate versions of Chromie and eventually meet Morchi, who is the Infinite version of Chromie. And so at
Yeah.
that point, like we got her as a boss fight, and we got to see like, oh yeah, we knew you were gonna have to rewind time, so we expected that, and that's how we're gonna bring Murazond out, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
So yeah, very interesting and using the like whole time aspect very well. And I also like after the dungeon, you got a few more quests with Nozdormu in the Infinite. I forget what her name was, but how she ends up now is helping the Bronze, but also how Murazond or not Murazond, Nozdormu is starting to learn from the Infinites and not just think that they're completely wrong.
yeah, no, I actually like this. And do you want to know another thing I like about this is while we were dealing with the Infinite stuff, I don't know if you remember this, but when the Time Rift started launching, a lot of the post Aberrus content was also launching, which is also relevant because we have a new Black Dragon aspect. And I
Yes.
gotta honestly ask you, Rising Sun, were you expecting that one?
No, but I like that that's the direction they
That's
went.
the
'Cause
general perception, and I agree wholeheartedly.
yeah, like I've liked Obsidian since like first met him in Legion,
Hmm.
so I like that he's been a constant character, not always like super prominent, but there.
But you'll notice he was the
Like
only one that didn't want it. Like even
exactly,
there's actually a discussion. I think it was in the Forbidden Reach where like Emberthal was even saying like maybe I should take this because then I could stop all of this infighting. And the entire time, Abyssian stuck to his guns. I don't want this shit. And eventually he gets picked. And it actually lore wise makes sense because I
yeah, he's
especially love that it is the two people who were fighting to become the Black Aspect that endorse him as the Black Aspect.
yeah. That's just I feel like that's just great storytelling.
Right.
It shows like his maturity, he's accepting it, and the others are like learning from their faults and deciding like, okay, we'll let him be the aspect, and we'll serve our flights in another way.
Which I've actually had debates with people online quite a bit on this because a lot of people are under the assumption that they've basically killed any development that they can do about Rathian from here on in or with Sibelian. And I wholeheartedly disagree because now you can go in a whole new, interesting direction for both of them.
Yeah, and, like, I feel like the stories can be wrapped up for now,
Yeah,
but why not continue it if you want to?
yeah, no, I think they've actually set things up that they could continue it in the Emerald Dream because we know that the Black Dragon flight is going to be there. In fact, in the latest cutscene that they showed up, they actually kind of show Abyssian armoring up, and we know that in 10.2 he is going to get a new aspect form. So he's going to look a little bit more Deathwingy, in or Neltharian y, I guess is the better way to look at it. So we know that they'll be there, so you can continue that development, and also you don't have to continue it here. You can move to the next expansion and work on the character flaws of Rathian.
Yeah, especially, like, if you go well, we might get into that, like, after they announce it, but especially, like, with Rathian helping us fight N'Zoth,
Mhm.
maybe tie more into him helping us against the Void in the future, and especially with the Ridicron,
Yeah,
that would be a perfect way to, like, have Rathian be involved, not as a Black Dragonflight aspect, but just as Rathian.
well, it's actually interesting for some of the interactions that Rathian gets in that final chamber in Aberrus, where it's completely touched by the void, where you just get a look from him in the cinematics where he's just like, "I thought this was done. It turns out I was very wrong." and this is not the end of it. We're gonna see these guys come back again. And so at
Okay.
that point, I like that they kind of hinted that Rathian probably has a different direction that he needs to go. Because he is a purified black dragon. So at that point, he knows what the old gods can do, especially now that he's had them in his head. So kind of moving things along because there's still a bunch to go over, but then we get into the current patch that we have now, which is basically setting things up for 10.2 and the Amir Drasil raid, where we're going to go into the Emerald Dream. So we get yet another catch-up mechanic, which is the current one, the Dream Surge events. So you now have the time rifts that you can still do. You still have the Suffusion camps, which you can still do. You have Zeralek Caverns. You can still do all that stuff to be able to get catch-up mechanics. But then you also have the Dream Surges that allow for you to be able to buy, right off the bat, 402 equivalent gear, which is basically what? Normal Aberrus?
I think that's LFR.
Okay, so that's LFR Aberrus.
Yeah, the 415 is normal, which you can like get once a week.
But then you get you get a once a week quest that you can get 415, which would be normal Aberrus gear. And on top of that, they also looped in a second Turbulent Time Ways during all of this that gives you the equivalent of heroic Aberrus gear in 428 pieces. So they have a really great way to be able to get people to finish up Aberrus because Amir Drasil is coming. So again, this expansion has been amazingly alt-friendly and has allowed for people to go, oh, I haven't touched this alt in years. Let's see what they've done with him so far. And not only that, but Evoker's got a whole new talent tree.
Yeah, a whole new specialization.
A whole new specialization, and in fact, potentially a whole new role that can now be brought in as they became the first support that can happen. So if people don't know the details of this, the Evokers now have a third talent tree called Augmentation, which is a DPS tree. Don't get me wrong, but it is primarily DPS based on buffing your allies and buffing their damage in order to buff your damage. So at that point, we actually might have the cusp of a whole new role that we will be seeing in raids from here on in. Because I could totally see them going back to other classes and specs and saying, yeah, we could totally make this into a support.
Yeah, and like just make it tune the game around saying, okay, you need like one support, or for raids maybe two, depending on the size. And just like making that be like, you have now 4 roles, you have like your healer, tank, DPS, and now one support.
Yes, but the support can also work as a DPS, so they don't have to worry about harming their great triangle here, or their great triforce of roles. But then they can also expand it.
Yeah, so what they have right now, they just like treat it as another DPS. Its personal numbers are really low, but when you take into account the damage it adds to the others, it's like on par, if not better than a normal DPS.
What's funny is that yes, in when it got introduced, it did start low, but now in according to PTR numbers, Augmentation is actually one of the top 10 DPSers in Amir Drasil, and it's primarily because of the buffs.
Yeah, because like I've played it, like its damage is terrible. But that's because that's how it's supposed to be.
Yeah, it's terrible solo-wise. You need to be in groups to be able to properly utilize Augmentation. And so that's disappointing, but compared to how things were in vanilla WoW, and if you were stuck in Augmentation, you'd be boned. But now you're not. Yeah. You can just go to Devastation. Yeah.
Yeah, and that like maybe not like as well, but it's functional. It can work for the world content. You might not have like the perfect gear because you have your augmentation stats, but that doesn't really matter.
Right. And so at that point they've found ways to be able to incorporate whole new ways for people to be able to play this game who have been tanks for forever, or have been healers for forever and don't like healing. Now you have a whole new role that I literally went through the classes as soon as I played a little bit of Augmentation. I went, this is basically what happened when monks were introduced, because the way that healing monks at that time worked was, they had to be melee DPS in order to be able to get a lot of their benefits so that they can then heal the party. So they basically became kind of a raid healer that eventually grew, but they were also in the fray with the melee. So they were usually the guy that you had soaking with the melee to be able to help them out. So it essentially helped raid composition in a weird way. But then
It like made your one killer a melee.
but then we come to Legion, and now we have discipline priests, holy paladins are working in a very similar way. And so at that point, they're not necessarily melee, but they actually use a lot of damaging abilities to be able to aid their healing. So at that point, I could totally see them going, oh, we haven't really done any now that we have augmentation, we we haven't really been doing anything with subtlety rogues. Yeah, let's make them into a support build.
Yeah, that could be interesting. I
Yeah,
saw a like thread on Reddit mentioning like maybe make a new paladin spec that's like a ranged DPS, but more built around support, like with the blessings
I've
and
seen that
all
too.
the other.
Like a lot of people have been asking, maybe this is a way to justify a third demon hunter spec, or to be able to give a fourth one. I've seen fourth for priests and paladins in
Yeah, I
this
think,
regard.
or you could also make enhancement shaman a support DPS
Mhm.
instead of like because that wasn't that what it originally
Or
was.
you could
They
make
moved it to be
elemental the focus, and they basically become kind of the raid buffer instead of being the raid healer when you're restoration. I've
yeah,
seen
that
that
could be yeah,
justification too. So it just opens up
but
possibilities for a lot of people.
yeah, like so many different options.
So it's definitely something to look into. But now that we're pretty much up to where we are, and we can't really talk about 10.2 because it isn't out yet, and probably by the time we get to the expansion announcement, we'll at least be able to talk about 10.2 to some extent. Let's actually go into. I actually had you do some homework here for this expansion, which I also kind of did myself. What are so we're going to bounce back and forth here. What are three things that you think the Dragonflight did exceptionally well? Because to me, like Dragonflight is a pleasant surprise of an expansion. Because considering how bad things were, in my opinion, with Shadowlands, this is very much a breath of fresh air. What are three things that this expansion has done that have made you very happy with it?
So I think the class design
Oh, and
is
we'll
in
just
the
go like
best place.
one after the other, and all that. So sorry, I didn't
Okay.
mention that before, but
Okay, so like the one thing that I really like is I think the class design as a whole is in the best place it's been probably since Warlords of Draenor.
right.
A lot of the class I play, if not all of them, I really like the way they feel. There's like a couple exceptions,
No, it's
like
actually
Shadow
encouraged me
Priest.
to try other specs, like specs that I've
Yeah, like
always felt have been either way too low on my radar or that just don't seem very fun.
yeah, Shadow. Like I'm currently maining a Blood Death Knight, but like Frost is fun too. Unholy, I'd like to spend more time getting into it. Shadow Priest, I love. Holy Priest is solid.
Right.
All or the Devastation and Augmentation Evoker are great. I need to try the healing a bit more to like really understand it.
Hmm.
Marksmanship Hunter, I've been playing some, and that's good. So like a lot of classes are in a really good state right now, just with the way they feel.
I
And
would
I
tend
feel
to
like
agree
that's
with that,
been
yeah. Because I remember way back in Legion when I did the videos on the artifacts, because the artifacts were so fucking cool in Legion, having these Arthurian lore esque weapons that we could all wield. I did videos on acquiring all of them, even though like a lot of them are just repeats, guys. I get it, but I still love that they had these interesting lore aspects, and the customizations were amazing for a lot of those too, especially once we got into Legion where you got secret ones. So I love doing that, but I can definitely tell you there were classes I didn't have fun playing.
yeah, like Legion did so many cool things with the classes, but they end up ruining a lot of the classes how they
And
played.
it made it especially worse because I was playing on PTR or on the beta. So at that point I couldn't use add-ons at that point. So I couldn't like augment them to make them a little bit better to my playstyle. But on top of that, you just see all the gaping problems in the philosophy and design. For example, one of the ones I really didn't like was Subtlety Rogue, because Subtlety Rogue has been dwarfed by combat and or I'm sorry, outlaw and assassination for the last couple of expansions now. And so what they basically did was, oh, well, you're stealthed all the time, right? You do nothing but shadow damage. Like, this is the dumbest way to incorporate shadow damage into a rogue. Like, there are so many better ways to be able to do it. And the other one that also actually annoyed the crap out of me, but now I tend to like, is Holy Paladin, because they also integrated making Holy into like a sub ret kind of build so they could be melee healers.
and that's actually something I disliked. That was more with like the Battle for Azeroth. How much is like, okay, do your Crusader strikes, send Holy Shock out to everything, which it felt like you're playing a DPS, not a healer, which is not the reason I play a healer.
Right. And so when I actually got into some of these specs again, now that I've been playing a lot of alts recently, especially for Turbulent Timeways, because I've been trying to level a bunch of characters, I've once again been able to notice, wow, they've actually done a lot of really great work on a lot of these classes, and they are, in some ways, very refreshing. And part of it is because of the talent revamp.
Yeah, and I went to try out Holy because I thought about playing the next patch, and I played. I was like, this is pretty good. I think I need to like get used to it again.
Mm-hmm.
But it's probably the best it's been in a long time.
And on top of it, one of the things I think actually really helped with it was with the talent revamp, they actually took a lot of old things from Legion, Battle for Azeroth, and Shadowlands and incorporated them as talents to be able to flesh things out. So, like, for example, a lot of the artifact abilities that didn't translate over to BFA were then integrated as talents in the talent revamp for Dragonflight. So, for example, like I loved the bear tanking or the bear druid artifact ability, Rage of the Sleeper, and that got tossed because it just basically made it didn't make bears god levels of DPS, but it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And because Blizzard tends to be the fun police, they tend to make my day hard. And so they reintroduced Rage of the Sleeper as an end talent. And it's just like, oh, I get my favorite thing back? Oh, but you've also done all of these other perks that came with Torghast, because a lot of Torghast talents actually made their way into the talent tree as well. And now I have perks from 2 different expansions that I like and that I use all the time.
Well, it's like with Holy Paladins, like you got the Legion artifact ability, like the tier that just heals everyone around you, and like increases your healing received. I think you also have Divine Toll from Shadowlands, which was
Yeah.
wonderful. You have Glimmer from BFA. You have the Blessing of Seasons, which is the other Shadowlands Covenant ability, which like
Yep.
it was a bit more niche, but still like an interesting option if you want to go that route.
Mm-hmm. Which is
So it's
actually
like,
funny because I could have, if I worked things right in the talent tree, if I really wanted to, I could not only have Rage of the Sleeper, I could have the buffs from Torghast that make Barkskin actually a worthwhile deal combined with Rage of the Sleeper, but then I could also be a total asshole and get Convoke the Spirits from Shadowlands as
oh
well.
yeah.
And then I can just murder things if I wanted to.
Yeah, like Convoke is such an iconic ability. I think forget which covenant that was, but it's like that was a big part of Druids. So it's like
Yeah,
they brought it forward.
that was the Ardenweald
Mindfay?
Ardenweald
Yeah,
covenant for druids only. So it was like you randomly cast 12 spells that your spec can cast.
yeah,
And so at that point in Torghast, Convoke was god tier, especially if you had the right benefits going to it. So if I really wanted to, I could have Rage of the Sleeper plus all the passive damage that I can now get with Barkskin, plus all of the benefits that I would get from Convoke. Yeah, I could destroy things if I really wanted to. So okay,
yeah.
so
So
you love a lot of the class design, and I would
yeah,
I
there's
would
a
tend to agree
couple,
with that.
I don't, but as a whole, a very good place for a lot of
But that's the
classes.
thing is like even some of the classes that aren't liked right now, they have revamps coming. I mean, in 10.2 we have a Demon Hunter revamp that's coming because a lot of people have been very mad about how I think it's either Vengeance or Havoc that has been very subpar, and they're going to
In
revamp it.
which I like, I tried that out recently. I might be playing that next
Mhm.
patch, but like Havoc, it's fine. Like I can see the issues, but I would enjoy playing it.
I'd love to play
Vengeance is
Vengeance
similar.
because like that's the one tank class that I haven't really messed with yet.
Yeah, so it's like they're like going around all the classes, saying, okay, which ones need work? Let's spend some time figuring out how to make them
Yeah,
better.
what's funny
I
is like you're a Blood Death Knight. And actually when I usually had like one of my first alts that I would do in these expansions be my Death Knight, and he was blood as well. I got so fucking bored with the blood rotation that I just said fuck it and I went to Frost and I've never gone back. But then I look at my Demon Hunter and go, man, I really would love to learn tanking on a Demon Hunter. It looks fun.
Yeah, well, I feel like Blood is one of the specs that's like has not been touched for a while,
Yeah.
but it also works. It's like simple, but there's still enough in there to make it interesting.
Right. And I'm not knocking blood. For me, it's not fun, but for others it is. And I actually do like the fact that much like with bear druids, blood DKs are basically DPS tanks. And from what I understand, vengeance works the same way too, where there's an emphasis on damage, but also your doing damage actually helps your mitigation. So at that point,
Uh,
like you have a way to be able to stay alive.
well, for blood, it's like they don't mitigate or they don't prevent that much damage, but their death strike heals them based on the damage they just
Hmm.
took. So it's like a resource gain. You want to say like, okay, I need to know when the damage is coming. I need enough running power to like heal back from that. If you do it right, you'll heal for a ton.
Right. And that's actually, I think that's how Legion Blood Death Knights worked anyway, because at that point, they
Yeah,
basically became the one tank that if you played things absolutely right, your healer was bored the entire dungeon because you were basically death striking yourself back up.
yeah, that's how it's been like since Cataclysm.
Yeah.
They've
That's why it
they've
got
tweaked it a
boring
little.
for me. It's just like, wow, healer, why don't you go ahead and switch DPS? Because I'm doing your job for you.
Yeah,
So
they've done a couple of things, but the concept has not changed. But at the same time, the concept works.
it does, and and I'm totally on board with people who want to enjoy that. For me, I just got sick and tired of seeing the same buttons over and over again, and I really wanted to go back to Frost, and that just made me look at it and go, oh, I still haven't tried this Vengeance Demon Hunter. Let's go try that out. And so yeah, the class revamps have been amazing to be able to go through. My first one is basically what we've been talking about this whole time. Is this is the first alt friendly expansion that feels like an alt friendly expansion. And so at that point where I can't do raid content and be able to dedicate, 2 or 3 nights to go and clear Aberrus, I can instead do things at my own pace, and I can also refresh things by actually going and working on different classes and being able to have a unique experience. So for me, all of the alt friendly catch up mechanics have been a very pleasant surprise, especially for solo players, because that's the way that they stay ahead of the curve. They can't do anything other than maybe a Mythic Plus every now and again or an LFR wing. And this allows for them to at least stay somewhat relevant so that they can do whatever they want, which in my case is I'm a transmog whore. And so I basically gear up my characters so that I can nuke through transmog dungeons.
Yeah, and for me, it's like I like raiding. I don't have time for like a secondary raid group, but it's like, well, I can get my priest geared enough. I can just hop in a normal if I have like time one night
Right.
and enjoy that.
And the way that things have worked since Legion is like you could find very reliable groups very easy now. And so at that point, like for those who can't dedicate themselves to a guild, there are people that are able to just like do their own raid groups and run them off of BattleNet pages, and it works.
Yeah, and like if you wanted to like go see Abris, you probably could just like hop on, maybe take you a couple nights to find a good group, and like jump in a normal, see the dungeon, get to have the fun with all the mechanics.
Which the other added benefit of that is like in Legion, because this was still a thing that was happening, is if you wanted to go and see the dungeon, you had LFR, or you paid a guild like 50 bajillion gold in order to carry you through normal or heroic. And that's how a lot of guilds earned their money, so that they could continue to fuel their world first efforts or whatever. And now we don't have to do that anymore. So I hate to say "f you" to the world first guilds, but "f you." Now I can see the story and I can enjoy a little bit of difficulty too.
Yeah, because like LFR, like it's an
Yeah,
option, but it's not. It does not have the same feel as an actual raid.
it doesn't. It's WoW tourist mode, but for people like me who just want the story aspect out of it, it's fine. Like
Yeah,
we can do
it
it the
has
way
its
we want.
place.
In fact, that's actually one of the things I've been doing with the alt friendly mechanics. Is I've been saying this for years, so much so my guild has been making fun of me for it, because since druids have 4 specs, and I actually don't like having 4 sets of trinkets and 4 cloaks and 4 sets of rings. I basically said a while back, like I'm just working on bear druid on my main because that's what I want to do. That's what I find enjoyable. To which I usually get the people saying, "Go cat," so that you can at least go do DPS and LFR. I fucking hate cat. I've never gotten over that. because I actually started being a cat druid in Firelands, and fuck Firelands. I hate Firelands with a burning passion. And part of it is because I hate the goddamn cat rotation and the fact that it's basically going to start early onset carpal tunnel for me. So at that point, I keep on saying to people, like, because I played balance in Legion and I really loved balance. And so I kept saying, like, I will eventually have a balance spec. Well, now that we have cross-faction guilds, that's another thing that a lot of people have loved from
Oh,
Dragonflight.
I didn't know about that.
I basically took my, in Battle for Azeroth, I went to Brinton's server with a troll druid that I eventually made a Zandalari. And so I basically said, why not? And I transferred him over to my server group, and I've been leveling him balance. And so at that point now, I can go into raid content in the balance spec, the DPS spec that I like, and I can have fun.
Yeah, there you go. And yeah, because it doesn't take you that long to get geared up.
No.
You're enough and you can jump into the raid and have fun with that.
And more importantly, I can focus on learning the rotation during that, because obviously it's been a couple of expansions since I played balance, and balance doesn't work the same way in each expansion. So I've been able to focus on working on that and then just getting gear as I go along. And Turbulent Timeways have been really helpful in that regard. Although tanks really hate me because if you've ever tanked for a balanced druid, I mean, I'm a fairly
Starfall.
Yes, exactly. Like, once you have that Starfall button, you just have to press it. So,
all right, if I ever run time walking with you, I'm not bringing a tank.
no, you're gonna bring a DPS so that we'd have fun and bullshit.
I'll bring my Havoc Demon Hunters, like AoE everything. That'll be fun.
Exactly. That's what you do, because that's one of the things that I absolutely loved about Legion was Starfall had so many freaking benefits. It was actually like a mandatory raid class, because that was basically how you cleared all the trash. So I always had a guaranteed raid spot because I was just spamming Starfall and then occasionally hitting Star Surges and redotting people up, and we killed trash really fast. So
yeah, you like pull it all dotted up and then they AoE down, which you might help a little bit there, but pulling it's the most important.
Exactly. So what is another thing that you think has been an absolute positive for Dragonflight?
So the raid itself is really good. Like we talked about the story of it, but like Avarice, I like a lot of the boss fights.
I've heard a lot of the mechanics are actually really well done.
Yeah, like I'm really bad at names. Let me bring Wildhead up so I can like talk about them. But I like a lot of them were like kind of simple, but not too much. Like Magmorax the dog, like that was a fun fight.
Mhm.
In part because I could be a Death Knight and Death is fan, so I would not be knocked into the lava.
Yeah.
At least most of the time, unless I forgot. Sarkareth, I thought was like a great final boss to the raid. Like intense and complicated enough to be interesting, but not just like crazy. You feel like you're never going to beat it.
That's one compliment that I do have for the raids of this expansion, is that the end bosses for it have meant something. I'm not saying that Shadowlands didn't do this, but eventually with Sepulcher, like everybody eventually started hating the jailer and hating his lore and didn't want to deal with him. And guess what? He's the final boss. But in this case, in Vault of the Incarnates, you have been dealing with this one primal incarnate, Razageth, for the entire time, and now you're actually going to be able to see what she is capable of. And through doing that, we obviously F up. But then we go into Aberrus, and we have Sarkareth. And Sarkareth is basically another really great end boss, but primarily because of the fact that he acts like pretty much all of the other black dragons that have gone down before him. He's just as much Nefarian and Onyxia as they are.
I also find it interesting, like he's an evoker, and you feel like you're fighting an evoker with his ability.
Yes, you do. And
like he has his dragon breath, he has like the arcane abilities. He gets more void in the end, but still,
yeah, and the void augments the ability. So it's not like you're dealing with whole new mechanics. You're still dealing with the breath, but now it has void effects.
Right. So, and I feel like Razageth, I agree, like it was a good fight story wise, but it felt like it was too punishing that got more frustrating than fun.
I have
at least on heroic.
Like from what people have told me, Mythic Razageth is a nightmare.
Yeah, so I feel like that was like too much. Sakureth was like right in the middle, where it's like interesting, like the jailer it was tough, but it wasn't interesting.
Right.
So yeah, Sakrith was great. Echo Neltharion was a great fight.
Hmm.
Uh, Assault and Zakan didn't care for that much. Rashok was interesting. Forgotten Experiments was a fun fight to tank. Just trying to figure out like how do you balance the stacks, how do you keep from too much damage on the raid, keep it so your tanks aren't being hit that hard.
Right.
Like pretty much all the fights here I liked with like one or two exceptions. So that was a solid raid.
No, I agree. And another thing I also think that these raids have done right is for the last couple of expansions, they've always had to do some kind of cosmetics to keep the raid teams motivated to want to finish it through. And one of the ways they did it was that the end boss on Mythic would always have some kind of mount drop that people could then get used to and actually want their teammates to be able to go get. This expansion decided instead, at least with Vault, that instead it would be a dragon riding customization where you got to have your proto Drake look like Razagath. And everybody thought that was going to be how Dragonflight worked. Is like we weren't going to get new mounts, we were just going to get new customizations that looked like bosses. And then Blizzard throws you a swerve and they put the next customization on the first boss of Aberrus. And from what I understand, Sarkareth also has a mythic mount. So at that point, it's just like, oh, okay. So now we have additional cosmetics to look forward to. And obviously, I've already said this, but Amir Drasil has tons of druid cosmetics that I really want to go get, except for that fire boomkin, because fuck boomkins.
I thought you liked Boomkin.
I like boomkin as a spec. I do not like moonkins. I
Okay,
should I
fair.
should say that. I don't like wandering around as a fat owl bear. Um, so for all the people who are like, but you could be a druid of the flame moonkin. No, no. I instead will be in my astral form having fun.
All right, there you go.
There you go. So I
Yeah, you
love
have
the fact that
options.
they found ways to not only make new fights interesting, but also find way to keep longevity in these raids because we know that people are gonna have to raid these for a long ass time. And so gear can only go so far, especially now that we have the vault system and a couple of other ways to be able to get loot. So how do they do that? You can now get dragon riding glyphs in there. You can get mounts. You can get
So
toys.
So I have like two comments on this patch that may seem contradictory, but I think it'll be interesting to talk about.
Okay.
So from a gameplay wise, I think 10.1 is probably in 10.1.5 are probably like the best gameplay systems wise they've had WoW in a long time.
Yes. I would
But I
agree.
also unsubscribed for like a month and a half during it.
Okay.
But like it was because like okay at the start there's a lot to do, really interesting getting into it, progressing your character. Then after that it was mainly just like logging into the raid. But that was okay because I was getting tired of the other stuff and I wanted to go do other things like non-well stuff.
Which is
And then like
why this alt friendly stuff works so well in my opinion because that's kind of the issue that my guild is facing is that we have like way back in the day we were probably one of the harder hardcore raiders raiding guilds on our server. Now, a lot of those people have been on WoW for so long and know each other so well that they've become like they've moved on with their lives. They've gotten married, they've had kids. And so at that point they become way more casual and when burnout happens, they want to go play something else, other people will join them. And so at that point, yeah, we stop raiding after a while, but it's not like we come back 6 months later going, "Hey, how are you guys? Are you ready for the next raid?" No, they're busy playing each other in Apex Legends, or they're busy playing with each other in Hearthstone or Diablo 4 or stuff like that. And when they come back, it's not that hard for them to get back up into the curve. And one of the
yeah,
benefits that I would say is all the catch up mechanics and Mythic Plus has been a blessing in this regard since Legion.
yeah, it's also like it's okay to take breaks. Like
Hmm.
I feel like a lot of these subscription based games, you want you to just keep playing forever, but you're going to get burned out. It's by like, okay, play it, enjoy it for a couple months, and then just stop, go play other stuff. And then when there's new content, you can come back to it.
Well, and more importantly, WoW has always been the one that hasn't really embraced the fact that people are going to get burned out. And so they've always had that stiff you have to get back into the swing of things kind of curve. And in my opinion, because I've actually been playing Final Fantasy 14 with Brinton, and he's been explaining a lot of the features since he's been there since the first expansion for it. they basically embraced this idea and said, yeah, there are going to be times when you have to cut off this subscription. And so when you come back, we don't want to make it so that it's so insane for you to be able to get back into things that it's just too much and you don't want to do it. And so this is actually the first expansion, Dragonflight, I mean, where they've embraced that kind of model as well. And all power to them, because that's kind of the issue that we're having now, is that people are getting burnt out. They've been playing these games for so long and they want to go play something else, for crying out loud. And this allows for them to be able to come back and hang out with the friends and have a good time and not have to go do mountains of work in order to do that.
Well, and I've been in my break from WoW. I was playing some Final Fantasy. Like I wanted to get into like Shadowbringing since I heard it was really good.
Mm,
Surprisingly, like I'm having some major issues with it,
really? Okay.
which like just going through the story with it, which it has its good parts, but also like this is not the way the game should be.
Yeah, I wouldn't know, because again, I'm still like in the initial Realm Reborn kind of storyline. But from what Brenton has told me, like Endwalker kind of fixes a lot of the issues that past expansions have had, and on top of that, the new expansion Dawn Trail is gonna fix that stuff too, and make it a much more
Yeah,
casual approach.
yeah. So we'll see.
Yeah,
I might have to come back on your channel again to have controversial opinions about beloved Final Fantasy
we
expansions.
might actually have to do that, because Dawn Trail is coming, and we actually already have a couple of announcements for it. So we might need to bring it Brenton in on that discussion.
Okay, that
Um,
will be fun. I might Brent might hate me afterwards, but that's okay. He seems cool.
it's all right. Like, I mean, you have the casual raider approach, so he can appreciate that.
Yeah.
So at that point,
So
you've brought up the class design, you've brought up the raids. So I guess I'm gonna couple things with you, and I'm gonna go with how they've done the Mythic Plus rotation. Just because now I can look forward to seeing old dungeons again, and they're going to be just as hard as they were when we were doing them in heroic back in Mists of Pandaria or back in Cataclysm. And so at that point, they'll be enjoyable again, and not just something that I have to go do for time walking or something for transmog runs. So
yeah, there'll actually be a challenge to him, which yeah, that'll be fun. So you have something you're looking forward to with 10-2, even if you never raid.
it doesn't even matter, because I will still be able to enjoy the same lore, because we're going to be dealing with similar characters throughout. So, and not only that, but because you bring in old dungeons, you make trinkets and things like that viable again. And so it just breathes new life and change into the balancing aspect. So that's a two for us. What is another extreme positive that you would take out of Dragonflight?
So I mentioned it earlier, but the patch cadence has like every 2 months they have some sort of patch coming out
Yeah,
to bring something new to the world.
I would agree with you. The way that they've been handling patches as opposed to previous expansions. Now, granted, Shadowlands happened pretty quickly too, but I think we eventually got to the 2 year mark with Shadowlands before Dragonflight came out. So at that point,
Yeah,
they were
it was
getting,
right around 2 years.
yeah, they were getting used to that model, but now they figured it out entirely, and they've also figured out ways to be able to put additional content into it along with the new raids and whatnot. Because during this time, we've had what, two new heritage armor sets come out, and by that I mean one alliance, one horde. Um, we've also had an entire new customization set of quests happen for Draenei that can now become Eridar for that. So
Okay.
they found a bunch of ways to be able to retool a lot of this stuff, and they slide it in with all of the other stuff.
Yeah, well, it was like 10.15 before the 1.5 patches, like really did not have much content to them. It might have been like a few systems updates, something small.
Right.
In 10.15, they had a whole new specialization added to the game that completely changed how your group composition is.
Exactly. Actually, one of the things that was slowly slipped in 10.15 that a lot of people don't remember, I remember because of the controversy, was when they introduced the human and orc heritage armor, and how people hated them because they looked so bad. Like, they were so vanilla in how they looked. Like, not everybody was excited for it compared to, say, like the dwarf heritage armor or the blood elf one. So at that point, I remember that, but that was something that was just slid into 10.1.5, and eventually people started doing those. And in 10.2, we're getting Night Elf and Forsaken. So there you go. And I've even heard that rumblings with the new expansion, we might be looking at some new allied races
Oh, that'd be
because we
interesting.
won't be necessarily getting a new class this time around. So instead, we'll get new allied races.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Either like a new race on its own, which they haven't done. I think it's Pandaria. It was like allied races in BFA,
Right.
and then the Dragthier in Dragonflight.
Oh, and I just barely remember this. In 10.1.5, one of the other things that they did, they allowed Lightforged Draenei to become warlocks.
Yeah, they like added that.
Yeah, just they didn't make a big deal of it. They just threw it in there, and people love it. I actually think it's funny. You know, like now you can have this. You could go and do the green fire quest. And you can have your light adorned Draenei throwing out green fireballs. That's great.
Do they still have the Green Fire quest in the game? I thought they got rid of it.
To my knowledge, it's still in there, but I might be wrong.
Uh,
I did it way back when, so I don't have to
yeah,
worry
I did it
about
back in Cataclysm, which was painful.
it. I waited until Warlords to do it, so
Okay,
because
maybe
I
it's
heard
still
of
there
how
then.
hard it was.
I thought that was like something you got if you did it back like when it first came
Well,
out,
no,
though. Like,
it started in Mists because it was part of the Isle of Thunder. So at that point, that's when it was stupid levels of hard, and it was also hard to get the starting item for it.
right.
So at that point, like I did it as an expansion later because I knew that I could just outgear the thing and totally be fine.
Yeah, but that was cool though. I hope they do like again. I wish they did like more class focused stuff.
Yes. So with that, my coupling here is this expansion compared to Shadowlands just has a better overall quality of life feeling to it, where it is more accommodating to any kind of play style. If you want to be the hardcore raider, you can be the hardcore raider. If you want to be the guy that's completely dedicated to professions, you can be that guy now. You and actually like be able to earn a living off of it, at least with gold. I literally know people who do professions now that literally it pays for their WoW token each month. So they literally have gotten but then again, these are people that if they actually ever left our server, they would probably destroy the economy. So at that point, they've
Yeah,
literally not
fair.
been paying their subscription for years now, like since the WoW token got implemented.
I did that for a while, but I just can't keep up with the prices anymore.
Oh, dude, like Warlords of Draenor made these guys god levels of wealthy. Um,
Yeah, like the gold I made there lasted me quite a long time, but eventually I had to like use cash, which is bad because I like my money.
I like my money too, but like Warlords of Draenor was when I actually reached out to these guys. I'm like, what are you guys doing? And that's when I learned a lot of the secrets on how to save money better because I was totally addicted to the auction house before that point. And now I'm so happy that I don't have to deal with any of that. So much so that I like, even though I've been playing Dragonflight for a while, haven't really been paying into my subscription. I've instead been using WoW tokens when I want to come back. So at that point, it's just
Okay.
it's another way to say "f you, Blizzard" because I don't like some of the decisions you're still making. I'm not paying for this. I'm paying with in-game currency. Screw you.
Which is still indirectly paying, but okay, that
Yeah,
works.
exactly. So those are the three that I would have. Let's get into the absolute opposite of this. What has Dragonflight done wrong that annoys the ever loving crap out of you? And have three for these as well.
Yeah, so some of the classes I feel like have too many buttons that it's just like too much to handle.
Right.
Like I tried tanking on Brewmaster Monk. I had like two bars completely full of abilities, and I still feel like I was missing those I should hit on a somewhat regular basis. And I'm
Yes.
like, I'm not tanking on this.
Yeah, and that's actually been one of my complaints with Brewmaster for an expansion or two by now. Like by the time Warlords rolled around and I was actually messing around with Brewmaster, it was not as complicated as it eventually became in Legion. And so at that point, I would love to be able to see a monk revamp very soon to fix that. But I will definitely guarantee that that's been one of the irritations.
Yeah, Like, I feel like it's an interesting idea. It's like using the stagger, move, like spread the data out, and then like cleanse it when it gets too high. Like that kind of control is very interesting, but they have like so many things on top of it that it feels like it's just not fun to play.
What's interesting is, and I hope that they implement a lot of this later. A lot of the class flavor stuff that they said that they wanted to bring back because people were missing them. So, like for example, with shamans being able to bring back totems and being able to have them be a regular thing. Instead, what they basically tried to do was they made them a little bit more of a cosmetic thing because then at that point they didn't have to worry about the balance. So, for example, like if you really wanted your Eyes of the Beast for a hunter, there was just a book you could buy where you could learn Eyes of the Beast and you could use it. But most hunters don't need it. And so at that point, if you don't want it, you don't have to have it on your buttons. And I think that's actually a way to be able to do a lot of the cosmetic stuff from here on in, because then at least to some extent, you don't have so many buttons, but if you want to have those buttons, you can have them.
And for those, like, I don't really count this because I can just like have them on a bar. I don't have like keybound or anything. It's like press if I want to, but it's not in the way.
Right.
Like for Death Knight, I have like one bar of buttons and if like a few others for cooldowns. Like that's a good amount. I can handle it. It's like enough to be interesting, but not too many.
Yeah. But I would agree with you. Like they do need to kind of prune things down just a little bit, because even though we love the talent revamp, as we also kind of pointed out, they're adding a bunch of buttons to it, and now we have kind of a similar issue that's happening all over again, where we have too many buttons to press. And I actually did like what one person on Reddit uh, suggested, which was basically saying, like, you know, if you have a bunch of these talents that are old abilities that just go into other more awesome abilities, how about you just have them replace the ability? Because at that point, are you really going to use something like Stellar Flare if you're going to then, this isn't a good example because that's not how it works, but if you then take Stellar Flare and then your next talent is you go and get New Moon, and New Moon is better than Stellar Flare. So at that point, you're basically having Stellar Flare because you kind of have to for your DPS rotation. Wouldn't it be a
Okay,
better
but
idea for just New Moon to have the effects of Stellar Flare, which it probably already does, and then at that point you can trim the buttons that way?
yeah, or like have a talent where you can combine them. In that way, it's like less buttons, but you still get the fun of all those abilities.
Right. The other way that I also like is that you basically make them lesser versions. So at that point, depending on the situation, much like with Blood Death Knights have this as well with some of their cooldowns, but for Bear Druids, like if it's just minor damage that I'm getting, I can use Bark Skin. And I can use Iron Fur to be able to mitigate that damage. Oh, I've got a bunch of shit coming in. Okay, now I can use the bigger cooldowns to be able to stay alive. And
But it's also you also don't want like 5 different small cooldowns. Better to have like one or two, and then like one or two big ones.
but I like the fact that now we have lesser cooldowns, which maybe aren't necessary. Like if you're getting a ton of damage, it doesn't really, or if you're getting like hit once or twice, it doesn't really make sense for you to use a big ass cooldown. Instead, you can use a minor one, and the healer can get to you when they can get to you. So at that point, you can arrange it how you want it. If you don't want the lighter one and you just want to use survival instincts for everything, you can, and that's totally fine. But if you want to, you can also have the lighter version, and that's another interesting way that they can take buttons out of it. So my first complaint is actually going to be something that I have a problem with back in Shadowlands, and that is the renown system. I like the renown system. The one thing I don't like, though, is the rewards aren't really worth it, in my opinion. So one of the biggest complaints that I had with the Shadowlands renown system is, yes, you are able to upgrade your gear that is gotten through world quests. That was dumb, and eventually Dragonflight just said, oh, it's just going to augment with your item level. And that was a good idea for it. But another thing that they did was, yes, you would get cosmetics and pets and things like that, or you could buy them, and you would also initially get them. But then you also had dumb stuff where you could get a tabard, and you just aren't, some people just aren't interested in getting a tabard at that point. Or even better, with the end talents that you would eventually get, all you got from it was a title. That's all. So
Yeah.
you wasted most of your time. Like, you're supposed to get this really epic thing when you end it, right? Like right when you hit Exalted, and no, you just get this lazy title that you're probably not going to use. And Dragonflight, I will admit, did something better with it because they gave you a really rare crafting reagent that you could then use to upgrade gear with, but they still give you the goddamn title. And so that's a complaint to me, because if you want me to go through these renowned tracks, you've got to make it more interesting than this.
I feel like in a way, like what they have is good. That way, if it's something like you felt like you really had to get, you might just get burnt out going after
Mhm.
it. Well, for me, it's like, well, if I get it, great. That gives me something to like go to if I don't have anything else better to do. But I also don't feel overly compelled to go after it.
Yeah, here's an example that I would say, like, here's how you could improve it. One of the things I've had a problem with the renown system in this one is, much like with other expansions, if you want to get your profession recipes, you have to go to specific reputations and grind those out so you can then buy them. And instead, where they actually had kind of a tiered system in Shadowlands where you could get the lighter recipes early on and then some of the more difficult ones later, this one they basically said, oh, you hit renown 15 or whatever, and everything unlocks. But 15
Oh
took
yeah,
so long to be able to do. What I would do instead is just say, like, okay, let's take these recipes, we'll break them down into like 3 or 4 tiers. And then you get tier 1, that gives you like 3 recipes that you can then work with. Then you get tier 2 later on, that gives you more to work with. And so you can have that balance between working in the world as well as working on your profession. That would be one of the things that I would do to increase uh the problems with the renown system.
yeah. I think that could be good too. Just like give you something where you can like get to it without having to go out of your way much. But then and still like have some maybe like have a mount or something cool like that at 25 or 30 or whatever the cap is.
Yeah, I don't know why a mount isn't part of that, because you could easily put like a mount or a really rare toy behind that, and the casual players are gonna love that, and they're gonna work their butts off to be able to get this rep. Um, it's a lot, and I get it. There's gonna be people that are gonna scream at me like, "Well, they're title farmers too." Yes, there are, and I'm not trying to discredit you or anything like that, but to a majority of the audience who does not care about a lot of these customizations, a title is not worth it to me. If they wanted to be able to accommodate to me, you'd put like a transmog ensemble at the end of that. That's like a really
Yeah,
epic set of armor that you can
or like
get.
something that like really fits that that faction.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what one of the things Shadowlands did that I thought was a great idea was they said, okay, at this level, you get your shoulders, your gloves, and your bracers. Next one is your boots, your belt, and your cloak. And they didn't do that here. They basically just, because most of the stuff that you got wasn't necessary, like, it was all cosmetic gear, and that was fine in terms of appearance. But instead, it was just like, oh, you get half and half. They should have really just broken all of that up, because it's technically easier to be able to get the same appearances via world quests in a different color than it is with the renown track. Because all you have to do, you have to wait until you're like 16 and then eventually like 25. It would have been better if you said like, oh, at 5 you get this, at 8 you get this, and at 13 you get the next one.
Yeah, I think that's kind of like what Shadowlands had for some of it.
They did, and I loved how that worked. That's actually one of the things I didn't have a complaint with the renown system. They actually found a way to be able to pace that out as well as the world quest gear upgrades. But then you had things like titles and pets and toys being put in the way wrong places. Like some of the toys that we got, like Hearthstone animations, they should have been later down the line, and instead the title should have been like Renown 3, in my opinion. You put something that like mount collectors are gonna, or ensemble collectors are gonna want at the end, because that's a good end reward for them.
Yeah, and that's just I feel like that's a more captivating like capstone.
Right. And
Or maybe you have like a tile like one or two away from the top. That way you get something, and that's something kind of cool,
mhm.
but that's like not your grand
Or
prize.
maybe if you want to do it this way, like I know a lot of these renowns, like when you hit the end, have achievements tied to them. maybe you want to do like an ensemble as the reward from the renown system, but then when you get the achievement, you get the mount.
Okay.
You get
Yeah, that
you
would
get
work
double,
too.
right? So those are mine so far. What is another complaint that you have with Dragonflight?
Um, I the what I have played for healers for the most part, I have not liked. It feels like their abilities are like spread across too many buttons for them to feel as good as they should.
Mm-hmm. I would agree, but I do know that we're getting a healer revamp pretty soon. They did say that they're going to work on a lot of the healing classes during Emergersil, and so at that point we probably will see a lot of that simplifying.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens. I feel like that's more of a minor complaint though.
Well, and I'm also one of those filthy casuals when I heal, and I have the audacity to use things like Healbot, just because I like it. It works for me. It's very efficient. Um,
Yeah.
but the
One of
problem
these days
is
I'll
that
get that set up again.
there's too many buttons to set for Healbot right now. Especially like I haven't played a Restoration Shaman since way back in early Cataclysm. And this is actually one of the expansions that made Resto Chamois fun again, in my opinion. But one of the problems I had was programming the goddamn Healbot because there's so many damn buttons I need.
That's why I haven't. Well, I played Holy Priest and I like that. I
Mhm.
liked what I played of Holy Paladin, but again, it was felt like I still had too many buttons. Like, okay, how do I work this in a way where I can like hit everything I need to easily?
Yeah, we're looking to hit buttons on a mouse. We're not looking to play the Moonlight Sonnet on it or Moonlight Sonata on it.
Right.
So
Maybe
I would
maybe
agree
if
with
I
that.
like move my beacons off of my main buttons, like to set them at the start of the fight, that could work.
Hmm.
And then that would free up a couple of buttons. So maybe I can do that and be good.
Yeah,
But yeah, that's like still my standard like keyboard layout is 16 buttons. If I'm needing to like find more of that for buttons I'm hitting on a regular basis, I feel like that's too many.
right. No, I agree completely on that. If you have to rely on, because to me, even 16 buttons is probably a bit too much. I think I run off of like a 12 to 14 kind of system. And even then, I still feel like it could be trimmed down. So at that
Yeah, or
point,
like have it.
if you're running off of that much, then obviously we could change some abilities and be able to
Yeah,
give better cooldowns in that regard.
yeah, or like and then like have like controller or whatever to hit others for like your cooldowns, but not what I feel like is a like rotational one.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. Um, so okay, so you have the issue with the class tuning with healers. Um, I will. So I'm gonna go back to dungeons really quick because one of the problems that I'm starting to have with Dragonflight dungeons in particular is aside from Dawn of the Infinite, because Dawn of the Infinite cut itself in half and made that work. I have no problem saying a few of these dungeons are probably a little too long. And by that I mean take about 30 minutes to complete. I'm looking at you, Brackenhide Hollow. um, Brackenhide Hollow, Halls of Infusion to some extent, or
Yeah.
Halls of Infusion can be in there, and also Oldemon, but Oldemon already had the problem, so I'm not necessarily throwing that in there.
Well, just do more DPS and they'll be shorter.
Yeah. So at that point, I think there's a way to be able to do it by basically saying like, okay, we have these mandatory bosses that you have to go kill in your order. Maybe some of them you could take and make into optional bosses and make more of a through line that somebody who's doing Mythic Plus is not going to want to take on those bosses. And so the order kind of reflects that because I have a lot of brand new tanks that I've been healing for that do not understand that in Brackenhide Hollow you can skip a few of the bosses and you're fine, but they want to kill
Yeah, 'cause
everything.
that one like seemed to and like as a new tank there, I didn't know what to do. I was like, well, the boss is
Mhm.
over here. I have this like rescue the five Tuskar, I think.
Right,
So it's like, okay, where did I go for that? It's like, but I don't know like what mobs should be skipped, what order to do them in, or any of that.
right.
And that's I guess one of the issues is like doing the Mythic Plus without doing them in tons. Like I don't know the routes,
Mhm.
and tanking is if I'm maining a tank, well, I should, or I have to play DPS, and it takes forever to find a group.
Right. And before people jump down my throat like you just don't like Brackenhide Hollow. I actually do like Brackenhide Hollow. My only issue with it is that it's basically like Razorfen Crawl, where a lot of like new tanks, new healers, new DPS don't understand that some of the bosses aren't necessarily required to kill. And so when you're doing it the first 10 times, you're like, oh, we'll do the full thing. This is great. By the time you get to the 20th, it's like, yeah, let's go kill the 4 bosses and move on. But that's like ultimately my issue here. Like, yes, I tend to be one of those a-holes in the queues who's like, yes, I only have like 20 minutes to run this thing. Can we please like chop chop, hurry up? Especially if it's a queued system. So at that point, yeah, I think some of the dungeons could be reduced a little bit. And my complaints ultimately are Brackenhide, Oldemon, and Halls of Infusion. Those are the longer ones. The other ones, perfectly fine. As far as so, I'm not saying this is a big problem. It's just a big problem to me. And actually, one of the ones that I don't like is No Coup Defensive. Not because of the vehicle mechanic, but because it takes so long to get to the bosses with said dragon riding mechanic. And so at that point, those are the dungeons where I'm like, yeah, we can make like one boss in here optional and we can skip them. And so at that point, I do think a lot of the other dungeons did that really well. I would actually say that both Neltharis and the what is it, the Azure Vault are both really good examples of this because they are basically uh different versions of the Nexus. Where yes, there are branching paths and everything like that, and yes, all the bosses are required, but you can change the experience enough each time that it's not boring.
Yeah, and I think that is kind of like my complaint is related to dungeons. Like, as a person who like only occasionally plays Mythic Plus, it feels hard to jump into it.
Right.
Like, I don't feel like I have the knowledge to be able to keep up.
hmm And the problem is that when you have a bot or like a place like Brackenhide Hollow where it's like I can't remember the exact boss count, but I think it's like 6, and ultimately the ones that need to be killed is like 3 or 4. Um, unless you go and look up 4 different websites on how to run the dungeon, and then you basically pray that the tank knows what they're doing to be able to do that. That's too much effort at that point. I think it's just a better idea for everybody to be able to know, okay, these are essential bosses, these are optional bosses. We don't have to do them. And that would probably fix a lot of it, but overall, if when they start designing dungeons for the next expansion, look at dungeons like Beltharis and Ruby Life Pools and Azure Vault, because those are appropriate in terms of length. And for all the people that want to get mad at me for No Coup Defensive, screw you guys, because unlike you, I actually think the Oculus was more fun than No Coup Defensive.
Yes, but wants to do the Oculus. Maybe we'll bring that as a dungeon for the next expansion.
I hope so, just to piss off a bunch of people.
Okay, I want to see it now.
Actually, here's an idea. Put No Coup Defensive and Oculus right next to each other, and then put up a poll on the forums and just let them have
Oh
it out.
no.
That would be great. Okay, so the last thing that you don't like about Dragonflight.
Yeah, that was it. Like, it's hard to jump into the dungeons that I don't do often.
Okay, so we pretty much covered it.
Yeah.
My third one is a little interesting because I have been hyping up all of the alt-friendly stuff in this expansion, but they could do more. And this is actually very irritating to me when I'm leveling alt, because in Shadowlands they created the chains of, I can't remember what the feature was called, but basically if you're playing on an alt, you don't have to play through the questing experience again. You can instead just start up with world quests and level up that way.
Oh yeah.
I think it's called Chains of Eternity or something like that is what they called it.
Yeah.
They
So I thought it was something about fate, but yeah, I remember what you're saying.
Chains of Fate. That's what it was.
Yeah.
This time around, they didn't do Chains of Fate. They just said, "Oh, here's the Valdrakken portal. You can go use it." And so at that point, I'm happy that they did that, because then I could just go right into what I want to do. And on top of that, like, I didn't have to worry about getting all of the dragon riding abilities again, because they were all available to me right off the bat. Here's one thing that was really annoying, though. So on my capped characters, and it's a time walking week, I get a quest where if I complete 5 time walking dungeons, I get an awesome new reward. And granted, I get it. It's raid gear. Not a whole lot of people want to be able to do that. They think it would imbalance things. But wouldn't it be great if you were on an alt, you could do the time walking weekly, and instead of getting a really good piece of gear, you just got a butt ton of experience.
Oh yeah.
Or not only a butt ton of experience, but also an experience buff.
Yeah, or maybe like you can choose, do you want gear or do you want like the experience?
Right. You can make that choice. So I would love to be able to see that. Now, granted, I get that there are certain ones you can't do. Obviously, the Dragonflight dungeon event where it's mythic only, I get it. You can't have alts do that because it doesn't make sense for them. Also, some of the PvP stuff wouldn't work. But in particular, I think you could do an alt friendly version of the time walking ones, as well as an alt-friendly version of the World Quest one, because that's what we're doing on our alts, is we're getting gear
Right.
on World Quests, and that one can just give a bunch of experience, much like the time walking one. Not only that, but just curious, did you ever do the weekly dungeon quest that they would have for rep?
Uh I don't think I ever like went on my way to do it. I did that a couple times just because I was doing it for gear.
Well, you know what I'm talking about though, right?
Yeah,
Where you would
like
find
do
out,
this dungeon,
yeah, do this
you get
dungeon,
some
get this
amount of rep.
item, we'll give you a rep token or whatever.
Yeah.
So they actually changed it up in Dragonflight in a good way, in my opinion, because they basically said, because not a whole lot of people run, because of Mythic, nobody really runs heroic versions of these dungeons anymore, where new people are trying to gear. So
Oh yeah,
instead of
that
saying,
weekly quest.
yeah, they changed it so that instead you don't have to just go to Underrot and get this one item. Instead, they said, go complete 5 heroic dungeons. And we will give you, I think it's all of, like, we'll give you a little bit of all of the rep that you can get for the renown system. Plus, we will get you a normal raid equivalent piece of gear that you can
Yeah,
get in.
I did that with my guild at the start, like
Mhm.
10-1, just because well, this helped us gear up faster. I like that because it felt good. Like it felt good to get all the rep and make progression there. Is also a useful piece of gear, and it also helped you with the weekly quest too.
Right.
So just like it felt good to do all that and make progression in all those ways. Doing something that's just like a fun night to like spend an hour with friends doing that.
Not only that, but also you could either get a piece of, they did this in, I think, 10.1.5, where they basically said, okay, you're going to go and do this, right? You get a choice. You get the rep, obviously, but you can choose between a piece of gear or a crest in order to be able to upgrade your gear. Which, since everything is heavily dependent on the crests and the flight stones right now, it's actually a really nice thing because maybe we don't need to get gear. We just need to get crests so we can enchant them or whatever.
Right. Yeah, which I feel like that was good. I don't think that was like by the time you would no longer need the normal gear, you probably didn't need the crest that much, but still it
Mhm.
could be good in some cases, so it doesn't hurt to have the option.
But what's interesting is, and this is where I was saying that the 10.2 might have fixed this problem, is that we might actually be getting a way because we're going to get new crests, the nascent dreaming whelpling crests now. We're going to be getting whole new crests, but now there's a possibility we might be able to upgrade from, say, whelpling to drake if we want
Right.
to. And so then at that point, what you can basically do for alts is not only does it give a butt ton of experience, but uh, I actually have heard a bunch of people complaining that yes, they do give quite a bit of flight stones, and yes, the cap is actually pretty sufficient for it. But then there are also people who are a little bit more casual that are kind of starved for flight stones, especially when it comes to alts. So they
Oh, so you can like do flight stones or get flight stones with these.
so what I'm basically saying is not only do you get the butt ton of experience, but also this will encourage people to play on alts, give them a butt ton of flight stones or give them a minor crest, and either so they're making a way for you to be able to upgrade them, right? Why couldn't you just do that in the opposite direction as well? why couldn't you break a Whelpling crest into a bunch of flight stones that you can then
Oh,
send
yeah.
to your alt?
Yeah, and because I feel like flight stones are the limiting factor for ults right now.
Mm-hmm. And for the record, for all the people who are saying, well, that's way too much. No, it's not, because the weekly that we were talking about, where it gives 3,000 rep plus an additional guideline, alts can get that, but it's just the rep grind. And they don't get the additional rewards out of it. They just get, and I quote, a butt ton of experience from it, which is exactly what that should be.
Yeah.
So my complaint here is that yes, they've done a lot in order to be able to make things alt friendly, but there are still ways to be able to push that further. And no, it's not going to make the game Care Bear. It's not going to make the game super easy. It's instead going to improve the things that we've been talking about this whole podcast. If if Rising Sun wants to take a break and comes back, it's not going to be as intimidating for him to get geared back up again. And so at that point, and also it's going to encourage him to go play with his guildies, because he'll probably want to go do those on heroic with his guildies if he
Yeah.
wants.
Yeah, that's a great way. Like, I'll probably do those at the start of 10 too, as well, if it's there again.
So now that we've talked about the bests and worsts of Dragonflight, now we can look a little bit more into the future. So this one was a little bit complicated, and if you didn't have too many for it, I would totally understand, Rising Sun. But I also asked for a third one, which was basically features that either could be improved upon from Dragonflight going into the next expansion, or new features that could start in the new expansion that you could think of that would benefit you as a player, or benefit people that you know as a player.
Yeah. So I like the upgrade system. I think that's something that they should keep doing and keep refining.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I really like that even if you don't get gear from a raid, you're still getting the crests, and that's letting you upgrade your gear, getting stronger.
Everybody wins from that. And actually, one of the other things that I think would also benefit that, it's actually going to be one of my things, but I think the vault could also benefit this as well.
Yeah, and something I think could be good is being able to target something in your vault. Like, say there's a trinket you really want, it's been 5 weeks and you haven't gotten it. You can get an item that eventually will let you decide, okay, in my vault, I want this trinket this week.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
Something
they
like
did
something
something
like that, but I'll get there when I get there. But yeah, something close to that.
yeah, and I think it's the way it's random is good for the most part, but having that as a stopgap to making it so that even if you have terrible luck, you'll still get something good eventually,
Yep.
or you'll get the item you want specifically.
Right. So one thing that I think that they could do at the end of this expansion, and I know that people are gonna probably tilt their head when I say this, is I actually don't think it would be a bad idea, because we know that if there's a new expansion coming, that there's going to be a beta test, and there's probably going to be an alpha test for the content creators and all that. Do you by chance remember season 4 of Shadowlands?
No, because I unsubbed for 90% of it.
Okay, so let me bring you back up to speed, because this is actually something that I would like Blizzard to consider doing for Dragonflight. So basically, what they did was, this was the first time where they incorporated older mythic dungeons, in or Mythic Plus dungeons into it. So they basically held a poll, and they brought in the mega dungeons from. So they brought in Karazhan, Mechagon, and Tazavesh, but then they also ran polls on dungeons people would like to see from Legion or from Warlords of Draenor, and they basically did that. Not only did they do that for the Mythic Plus portion of it, but they also introduced the Fated Raid system. And what this basically did was that each week, a raid would be highlighted as fated.
Okay. Yeah, I did do 2 of those raids.
Yes. So at that point, you one week would have Castle Nathria as a fated raid, and you would be able to run that as if it was progression, and still be able to get benefits from it, because you got upgraded pieces in it, but you also got a separate currency that you could later use with other vendors. And those vendors
Right.
had specific items that people wanted for that currency. I think they should do that for Dragonflight. I think that they should bring both of these systems back because here's the thing, whether we like it or not, we're going to be waiting a while for the new expansion. And that while can be anything from 4 months all the way up to 6. Maybe even 8
Yeah.
months. Who knows? They might have problems.
Yeah, and especially since it feels like 10.2, there's a good chance that will be the last uh, major patch of the expansion.
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise, I feel like the time just wouldn't line up.
But basically, what you could do with this is I'm going to implement what I'm going to call the greatest hits patch. So basically, what Season 4 would be is you'd have that faded raid system. You would have a whole new pool of mythic dungeons. You can have Dragonflight dungeons. You can have older ones. I think you should have Dragonflight to some extent to just kind of highlight what the expansion did right. Because again, it's a greatest hits patch, right? So at that point, you could implement these things because we're getting ready for the new expansion. So either people can take a break, which people do, or you can go and be the min-maxer you want to be and go min-max the F out of your character. And then you can go and do whatever you want to prep for the new expansion. And this also helps in another way too, because maybe you were this guy. I don't know when you joined in Cataclysm. Maybe you joined in the middle of Firelands, so you never got to see Bastion of Twilight. What this basically does is, let's just say you came in for Castle Nathria, but then you missed the other 2 raids. Well, now you have a reason to go there, don't you?
And now it's like it's tuned up, so it's like a challenge again.
Mm-hmm. And
so you get the actual raiding experience instead of just like having to be super easy because it's old content.
And for all the people who are going to be screaming at me going, Drak, you're just making World of Warcraft more into Diablo! Well, I've said this to a few people, but as far as I'm concerned, the World of Warcraft team should be working on Diablo games. Because they're actually making good Diablo games at this point. So at that point, I think that we could introduce a 10.4, which has all of the catch. You don't even need to add new catch-up mechanics, because we already know we're going to get some kind of catch-up in the Emerald Dream.
Yeah, and maybe just maybe scale them up if you want to.
Exactly. You could easily scale up the Dream Surges because they benefit people who are trying to level, as well as getting the Dream Surge the Coalescence to be able to buy the 402 pieces. So you can just get them into the Emerald Dream, and then they could just start gearing up to normal from that point.
Yeah, and if they scale up the other like outdoor content, maybe that's like too much, but at the same time, you're at the end of the expansion. Does it really matter?
No.
Go crazy with it.
The thing that's going to matter is, okay, we obviously all want to see Fyrak die, and we all want our favorite melee people to get his legendary axe, and that's totally fine. But during that 10.4, you can also do what you did in Shadowlands, which is where you can put in the story threads that wrap up the expansion. So in the case of Shadowlands, we finally got to see Sylvanas punished for all the things that she did. We got to see a bunch of reunions with characters that hadn't seen each other for a long time. And also was ways to hint into the new expansion. So we found little things to be able to do to be able to keep the story moving forward. Originally, Blizzard's answer to this was, okay, we'll just make a book to do all of this. And they did. They tried to explain Sylvanas' actions, but then they also had these additional things going on to kind of wrap up story threads that hadn't been wrapped up yet in Shadowlands. Let's do that with Dragonflight.
Yeah, I feel like they've already been doing that throughout Dragonflight. Like
they kind of have,
especially early on in the patch, they'll be like, "Oh, have this like 5 quest line story this week."
But now,
it's like it's not.
What we can do is like if Fyrak dies, because obviously we're going to get a cinematic out of it. That would be a good time to say, "Oh, this is the new threat," and now we get to see all of the characters reacting to that new threat and trying to prepare for that new threat. Like that's additional stuff that you can do while people are doing faded raids and working on their Zeskara vaults and all that stuff. Like that's just added flavor.
Yeah, I would definitely be a fan of that. And like even if I take like a 3 or 4 month break, okay, I have a couple weeks I can come back and catch up on all the story and be ready for the new expansion.
Right. And I think that would be absolutely the way to be able to do that. So, what would be another improvement that you would like to see?
I think that's went through all of the ones that I had.
Okay. So obviously you want the
So
class tuning and everything like that, and
yes,
that'll
like do
happen.
the class tune. I think I would want when going forward, if they do have more support classes, I hope they're tuned right or they like build the game around it better. Because right now it seems like, at least judging by the internet, augmentation is like dominating the Mythic Plus, and like every group wants one,
Yes, and
and
from what
that
I hear
that
in
pushes.
the PTR, Amir Drasil, you at least want one augmentation one.
Yeah, and like for raids, I think one augmentation, that's fine. Mythic Plus, if you always want one,
Mhm.
now you have like 25 DPS specs in only 2 spots for them,
Well,
so that doesn't
and
feel
what
well.
makes that interesting too is somebody was actually, I can't remember what podcast I was listening to this because yes, even though I wasn't playing WoW, I still listen to WoW podcasts because some of them are actually fairly entertaining. Um, one of them was actually saying that augmentation hasn't really been properly tested in mythic raids. So at that point, it doesn't like the devs are not 100% sure how that's going to affect the makeup of mythic raids. So this would be the
Yeah.
time to do that, is to figure that
Well,
out.
yeah, I think that's probably why they introduced in like the 1 point, or the 10.1.5 is like the world first race had ended.
Hmm.
If they like messed up the augmentation tuning as well, that's probably the time to mess it up.
Yep.
Like maybe help other groups clear sooner than they planned, but not a big deal.
Well, not only that, but you also wanted like a healer revamp. Obviously, when that revamp happens, they're gonna have to balance that out again. And this would be the time to do it when nobody's like people are paying attention, but not a whole lot. And so at that point, they can then focus on the stuff that does matter instead of people screaming at them, going, "Where's my next cosmetic thing?"
Yeah, yeah. So like during the season four, it's like if they mess up there, it's like, or experiment and do something that they decide is a bad idea. It's like, okay, they haven't done anything that bad. They
Yep.
can learn from it and now make it good for the next expansion.
Especially since a lot of players like me, once an expansion is over, we I basically just sit there and gear up characters so that they can go do transmog runs. Like this is the time when I go and do the bonus content. So mount collectors go and collect mounts. They do their rep grinds for collecting mounts. So they're not really paying attention too much to what's going on with their healing class. If they are paying attention, it's very minorly. And so
Yeah,
that's the time for Blizzard to go in and actually implement the fixes if they need to.
yeah. Or yeah, and if they mess it up again, it's like if the healer balance is bad, does that affect your transmog run? Not really.
Not really, no. Because then at that point we don't have, and plus a lot of healers when they're doing these transmog runs are running DPS specs anyway. And actually, I
Exactly.
think WoW has, I think the Warcraft team has handled this very well by focusing on the DPS revamps early on in the expansion, and now they're talking about healer revamps. Uh,
Yeah, that'll be good because they haven't really done much like healer revamps this expansion, if any.
no, and this is actually the way to do it because then at that point they can focus on tuning that stuff, and they don't have a bunch of like world first raiders breathing down their neck, telling him no, do this, no, do this, and instead they can go, okay, we have this whole new priest build. Hey, dude from I can't remember. I can't remember the name off the top of my head. Dude from Method, can you go and test this out? And they can come back
Yeah,
and go, hey, this really works.
right. And they'd have the time to do that. It's they did like update Holy Paladin a bit, but I don't think that was like a full
No,
rework.
no, even so my brother plays Holy Paladin for raids when uh before he went to go and get his master's degree. He was their Holy Paladin healer. And even then he was noticing like, yeah, it's not looking like I'm gonna get a whole lot of love because it looks like they're more focused on Ret right now. But
Yeah, and Ret they did a ton
and
with.
Ret they did a ton with, but now in a 10.4 setting, they can work on Holy and they can address some of the issues and maybe address the button issue and all of that stuff. This is the time to do it, like I said. And at that point, they can just add, like for the people who want the cosmetic stuff, they can add in little quest lines here and there and just
Yep,
slide them in.
and that'd be good. That keep people subscribed. Like if you have any findings your transmog grounds, you get something that's like, hey, here's this new thing. We'll give you another new transmog if you go do it. That like keeps it exciting without it being like a giant thing of content they have to keep releasing.
Exactly. So I guess I'll keep going on with some of the improvements that I said. I'm gonna take this one out because it looks like they're already doing it. They're upgrading the crest system or allowing us for us to be able to do it. So I do like that. One of the things I also think could be done, and this is gonna there are going to be people in my guild that are going to want to kill me when I say that I want this. But I do think that we could add things on to the vault. And what I mean is, there's only 3 tracks in it so far. You have a Mythic Plus route, you have a raiding route, and you have a PvP route. For those who have never used the vault before, basically, if you do a certain amount of Mythic dungeons, what it will do is that once a week, or at the beginning of the week or once a week, you can go to that vault and it will send out a piece of gear that is from the Mythic Plus dungeons that you did that are specifically meant for you. And you basically get a second roll at the trinket you're trying to get. And if you do, so I said if you do 4 Mythic Plus dungeons, if you eventually do 8 of them, you get another piece with additional options that can be brought into it. So
And like
you essentially have 2 chances now to be able to get the trinket you want.
yeah, I think it's like you get one chance for one dungeon, second chance once you get 4, and then 3 for 8.
So it's addition. Well, yeah, right now it's 1, 4, and 8 that it
Yeah,
does.
and it's similar with raid bosses.
Yeah. Well, the way that Mythic Plus goes is that it counts the amount of final bosses that you kill, I think. And
I thought it was like dungeon complete, but same thing.
it could be, yeah. It could be when you get the chest. It counts the chests. So at that point, with raids, it counts the bosses. With PvP, I believe it counts how many kills you
I
get.
think it's I think it's
No, it's
honor
how
in
many
rated.
battleground or honor wins you get out of
Yeah,
it.
I think it's like amount of honor earned from rated PvP currently, but they tweak it.
Yeah, because in Shadowlands it was like honor, and then there was one tied to battlegrounds, and then there was another one tied to arena or
Okay.
rated
Yeah, I think
content.
they streamlined it. Yeah,
So
so basically it gives you another chance at gear. You get more options the more you play.
so a lot of people like that because it's basically geared towards the people who are doing the group content, and I'm that's great. But I do think that you could add another track onto it. And this one specifically would be for those who are trying to do solo-esque content or queuable content. And basically, what I would do is if there is a time walking week or a dungeon of that expansion week, you have a 4th track, which is basically tracking your progress with that. And then in turn, it's not going to give you like Mythic Plus gear. It's going to give you the same stuff that you would get from whatever world quest that you're out doing. But if you do, so at this point, it would be tied to the weekly events and maybe even some of the weekly quests that you're doing throughout the week anyway. You just get a reroll on some of the pieces that you were trying to get when you were out doing world quests.
Okay.
And
So
and
I could give you like a piece of gear you're missing or like transmog or whatever you're doing it for.
right, but it's also a great way to introduce people to the vault. Because
Ah,
right now the way that they have the introduction to the vault and to the catalyst is get this quest, it takes you to the vault, here's what the vault is, go look at it. Here's where the catalyst is, go look at it. Kind of thing. This in turn would explain how that works, and then the new player there can look at that and go, "Oh, I can do these, but I can also do these Mythic Plus things and get more rewards out of it that in turn I could then utilize." The other thing too that I would do is I would add an extra button on each of those, and I would basically cut down the dungeon requirements and boss requirements to be a little bit more digestible. So instead of 1, 4, and 8, I would do 2, 4, 6, and 8 kind of thing.
okay.
So 2 Mythic Plus dungeons, 4 Mythic Plus dungeons, 6 plus, and then the same thing with raid bosses, except at that point I do like 5, 10, 15, 20, or something close to that. More, I think 15 would probably be the end because
Yeah.
most raid dungeons now have like 8 to 10 bosses.
Yeah, I also like that it starts off with one. That way, just by doing something in, like doing one Mythic Plus, you get something in your vault.
Yep.
You don't have much choice, but it's something.
Yeah, so basically what I would do is I'd augment that to being like, oh, you completed a wing. Here's your first reward. Oh, you completed all of the LFR wings. Here's another one. Oh, you did the
Okay.
entire raid on normal or heroic. There you go. Oh, you did the raid multiple times. Okay, there you go.
Okay.
Just to encourage what communities are already there for them. And I would
Yeah.
do the same thing with PvP because I think you could honestly cut them in half and do one for battle or two of them for battleground victories, as well as two of them for arena. Because I've had more
Like
than enough.
encourage them to do a lot of the different content.
Yes, and also because I've talked to enough PvPers, and yes, there is a distinct difference between the arena people and the battleground people. So
I thought they were just the same people.
they're usually the same people, but I've actually met what I like to call arena elitists. And so they
Well, if they're
actually
really
get
good,
mad that they have to go and do those stinking battlegrounds when all they want to do is arena.
if they're really good at PvP, they'd be good at battlegrounds too.
Yeah, they just don't like the fact that they have to deal with all the stupid in Alterac Valley, basically.
I was just trying to troll them, but they watch this.
There you go. But yeah, you can have that fourth track to just basically introduce people to the vault and how it can help them. I think that would be a really great way to be able to do that, as well as introduce the weekly events. Because a lot of people don't realize this. I've actually had new people come to me in Valdrakken going, "What's this time walking thing that I keep hearing about?"
Yeah.
And so at that point, if you say, "Oh, do two time walking dungeons, you get a reward out of it," and then at that point you
It's like more obvious what they need to go do.
and you still do the weekly quest, they still get the 5, but then they can get additional rewards because again, when they
Yeah.
open up that cache, it's a random pick. So it's
Yeah,
just
well, I
more
think
random picks.
they are adding the time walking to like the first row soon.
I hope
So
so.
you will no, they're doing that in 10 too.
Oh, I hope yes, please do it because it's something
Yeah.
that's
So
sorely
that way you
needed.
get that way even if you just do like the super casual time walking, you still get something in your weekly
Heck,
chest.
you could still like how we have the weekly with the mythic or with the heroic dungeons. You could easily just do that when there isn't time walking going on.
Well, yeah, they are like I think it's heroics, mythic zero, and time walking all will count toward the first or the second row, the dungeon row.
Yay! I'm so happy about that if they do it. So, yay! I'm happy about it. The other
Yeah,
thing
they do one of the things you're asking them to do.
here's the other thing that I would also do with the vault. So, we've had these weeks, Rising Sun, both of us, where we get our vault rewards and they're trash. They don't help us out whatsoever, and at the most we'd probably disenchant them. But
Well, they
Blizzard,
do have the thing you can like exchange for like a gem sockets.
I
So
was actually getting to that. So they do have
okay,
another option that again I would introduce to new players is that you can pick a currency that allows you to pick up items like being able to put a socket on your gear. Or in the case of Shadowlands, where you could get a box of tailoring reagents that you can then go and use.
okay,
Because this one was really, really selective. But in
yeah, because there's like two or three other things, but most of it is like doesn't matter.
yes, there was a bunch of crafting ones in Shadowlands, plus you could have a big pile of gold that you could buy.
Right.
What I would do though is that they are fixed. So if you don't want any of these, you only get 3 of that currency. It's just like Volt coins. You only get 3, that's it. But a lot of people like me kind of sit there and go, well, but I went through the effort of getting all 3 on my Mythic Plus. So instead, what I would do is I would scale it. The more things you do in the vault, and you still don't get a reward that you want out of it, you would also
Okay, so
get
like
an
have a scale
increased amount
beyond
of
the
the coins.
yeah. So right now I think it's like you get one or you get 2 coins for like if you have one thing to unlock, 4 coins for 2, and then 6 coins for 3 or more. You like can keep the cap past 3.
Right. And so at that point, like that's what I would do is like you don't just get 3. I would increase the cap so that you could have no more than say like 50, because I don't think you should have more than that. But then let's just say at most for doing as many things as possible, you don't have to do it all, but if you do like 80% of it, you get 10 coins.
Okay, so like, yeah, keep increasing it then.
Yeah, so then at that point you make things affordable within that. But then here's the other thing that I would do is you could not only put in profession related stuff, you could put in essential toys, essential mounts for that. But because here's the thing too, if you want to get those arena mounts or whatever, maybe you could put in like a trashier recolor of it for 50 of that coin, and then people can go,
Okay,
okay, well at least I have the trashier version. But
yeah,
the other thing too, sorry, I'm running out of water here.
yeah. I should have
Is
gotten water before this.
so we have all the catch up gear, right, for every specific slot, right? Not really. There are two missing slots, especially in the Dreambound gear. The Dreambound gear does not let you buy trinkets.
Oh, true.
So,
Yeah, because I bought weapons and a neck for my demon hunter.
and here's the funny thing: is so jewel crafters are able to make trinkets and rings and necks, right? For some
Right.
reason, the Primalist gear, which was before the Dreambound stuff, the trinkets that you could get out of it had the potential to have a trinket that was better than what the crafted version could be. So
Huh. That's weird.
here's what you do: you put those trinkets in there because trinkets and weapons are the hardest effing thing to be able to get if you're trying to catch up, except you put them for an absurd amount of currency. So then at that point, if they still don't get it via all the dungeons that they ran, they could still get a chance at it, specifically just doing a roll with one of those catch up ideas, at least for the first bit.
Yeah, well, that's why I like my idea too. Is like every time you open your chest, you get an item you can trade for whatever item you want after like 5 weeks or whatever.
Mm-hmm. And
That way you can get
for all the
the guarantee saying, like, I really need this trinket. Okay, you've had bad luck. Here you go.
exactly, and for all the people that would say like, oh, well, then people would just get both their trinkets that way. No, because here's my answer to that: unique equip. So at that point, you can easily put in a ring and a trinket in that are expensive, that are unique equipped. And
So that gives you one of your two. So it's not like
and
everything.
even then, like let's just say it's for 50 coins and you do everything that week and you only get 10. You still have to do that for 5 weeks in order to get that.
Yeah, I think I would just make it something as like
It's
it's
last
meant to be
resort
like
bad luck protection is what it is.
right. Yeah, it's not something that was like this is the only way you get it, but it's like okay, you tried the normal way. There's bad luck here. Still have an option.
Mhm. Because that way people have enough of an option either way. So like I have a lot of I basically decided in this expansion that I effing hate crafting professions. I love what they've done with the systems, but I just don't enjoy crafting professions like a lot of people in my guild I know that do. So I actually basically decided, okay, I'm just going to do gathering professions and just sell what I get on the auction house so that I don't have my bank full of stuff that I'm never going to use.
And then you have the work orders, like you can work with your guild or whoever and get the stuff you need made.
Exactly. And a lot of the richer people in my guild, that's what they do. Because these guys are like farming on like 12 alts and that's just what they love doing. So, I think another thing that would benefit somebody like me is if you offered those boxes of enchanting goods. So then at that point I can just, if I want to, I can go sell them because I'm really close to my cap and I don't want to hit the cap. So at that point, you work for all kinds of players while also being able to make sure that the herd cur of the herd cur don't complain too much.
Well, they're always going to complain.
They are, but oh well. And actually, we are coming up on 3 hours, my friend. So unfortunately,
Ooh,
we've come to the new expansion, and unfortunately, there isn't a whole lot of speculation out there for it. So I'm kind of tempted to wait until BlizzCon and then we discuss what the expansion is, as opposed to speculating on the few tiny thread hints that are in Dragonflight right now. Does that sound good?
yeah. Otherwise, I was just going to come up with a random idea that makes no sense, but it's late and my brain's starting to stop working.
Exactly. So I think we've covered a lot of ground here. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed this. Overall, like I think what you've gained from this is like as compared to Shadowlands, Dragonflight has been a breath of fresh air for both of us, and we are both in different kinds of scenes right now. So at that point, it's been good for both of us. we hope that the next expansion continues this upward this upward climb for Blizzard, especially now that they're owned by Uncle Phil. But in the meantime, please feel free, if you guys have additional stuff that maybe we didn't think of, leave that in the comments below. Let's have that discussion because, like I said, after BlizzCon, we're going to get back together and we're going to talk the expansion and see what we're excited for that and all of that. Once again, thank you to Rising Sun for joining me on this. It's actually really fun to be able to talk WoW with somebody on a podcast. I've
Yeah.
been wanting it for a while.
I enjoy it. They need to make more content we're excited for so we can talk more together.
Exactly. We need to find excuses for that. And actually, we might need to bring you in on a GNRO podcast as well, because we have some big rumblings in the anime community that I need to bring in like a full anime panel to explain to people why these are probably not the best thing in the world.
Got it. So I'll go watch these old anime that no one cares about and rant about Twin Tails.
That, and also we're also seeing a lot of changes in like being able to buy anime merchandise and things like that. So it'd be great to be able to get multiple opinions on this.
Well, you forget that I tend not to buy anime merchandise.
Actually, I didn't know that. Now I do.
Yeah, most cons I will buy one thing for, and it typically has some sort of practical purpose.
All right. Well, we could still bring you in on a discussion, but
Sure, why not?
Thank you guys so much for listening in. Make sure to like and subscribe. It definitely helps out with the YouTube channel. We definitely appreciate it. You can also check these out on the podcast platforms that we're on, and I've said them numerous times. You can check in the description down below for it. And we will see you guys next time for whatever the new expansion is for World of Warcraft. And who knows, maybe we'll also bring you in for some Final Fantasy XIV discussion as well, because we do have a new expansion for that also. And
yep, I will.
It's got.
I'll need to play more and take notes and have things to say.
Yeah. I mean, we'll have a lot to talk about because I think we have 2 classes, maybe a 3rd coming. Yeah, etc. It's insane. But we will see you guys next time for that. Until then, have a good night or day and take care.
Good night, everyone.